Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto Uzumaki seals the Master Chunin exams. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Kagehisa and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Rasengan, mastered. When the dust cleared from the group's arrival, Naruto had only expected this Orochimaru to have some random henchman at his side to help him fight Tsunade, considering Jiraiya had mentioned both were of the three legendary Sannin. But the sight that met him was anything but what he expected. Kabuto stood in front of them, still as tall as Kakashi, with the silver gray hair tied in a horsetail, with eyeglasses resting comfortably on his nose. As first Naruto wondered why Kabuto was here and he and Tsunade were fighting, but he did a double take when he took a clearer look at his headband. The shield engraving was a music note, the insignia of the Otonin, sound ninja. Standing to Naruto's left was Jiraiya, a towering tall old man with wild, spiky gray hair and a horned headband with a kanji of oil on it, red hori overcoat, green guy and white trousers with wooden clog sandals. To the left of Jiraiya was Tsunade's apprentice, Shizune, a pretty, slim woman with short black hair and dark robes with long sleeves. Just hours earlier Jiraiya had hobbled to their apartment to warn them of Tsunade poisoning him, leading him to believe she wanted them to keep out of her affairs as she dealt with Orochimaru's proposal to bring back her loved ones in exchange for restoring his arms to full use. The night before, Naruto had collapsed due to chakra exhaustion from his training to perfect the Rasengan technique that Jiraiya was teaching him, and Shizune had carried him into their hotel room to rest. Jiraiya's mission to bring back the legendary medic Nina's Konoha's Godame just became a fight neither sides were willing to back down. Naruto looked past Kabuto to the tall, pale man with black hair, yellow slitted eyes and serpentine complexion. The hands that poked from his black sleeves were bandaged in gauze. He wore a tan-colored robe tied with a purple rope at his waist. He narrowed his eyes in anger and fury at the man. So that's the bastard that killed Sarutobi Jiji. Naruto thought venomously, cracking his knuckles from making a fist. Kabuto smiled disarmingly, a false smile that belied his deadliness, while Jiraiya and Orochimaru exchanged very brief greetings. It's been a while, Orochimaru. Still looking as pale, morbid, and sick as ever. You're slouching a little. Trouble with your arms. The snake Sannin sneered only as a snake could, cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. Still the dumb fool I remember. It's been too long, and obviously not long enough. I take it you and that blonde Kyuubi brat are the sacrifices Tsunade had prepared. After hearing the snake Sannin's statement about him being the vessel of the nine-tailed demon fox, despite having already learned that Orochimaru knew of it during the second stage of the Chunin exams, the blonde genin couldn't help but wonder why it was such common knowledge. Before Naruto could question what the snake Sannin meant by that last statement of sacrifices, the aforementioned slug Sannin shouted, "Get out of the way," and shoved past Jiraiya and made a mad dash to attack Kabuto, with her fist cocked back to deliver an earth-shattering punch. But just as Tsunade came within arm's reach of the Oto spy, Kabuto slashed his right wrist with his left hand's kunai, splattering blood all over Tsunade and effectively stopping the voluptuous medic Nin in her tracks. Tremors racked her body as she brought her bloodied hands up, her eyes wide with fear. Blood, so much blood. Her thoughts were cut short when Kabuto punched the woman hard in the face and sent her soaring backwards into Shizune's waiting arms to catch her mentor. Just when Naruto was about to follow Tsunade's lead and rush the smug grin teen, a hand on his shoulder stopped him. Jiraiya's. Don't. Said the Gamma Sannin, Kabuto's at least as strong as Kakashi and much more experienced than you. You don't stand a chance against him, at least not now. Leave him to Shizune and guard Tsunade. Her fear of blood leaves her vulnerable. Kabuto, having heard the exchange between Jiraiya and the blonde genin, sneered and adjusted his glasses out of habit. Jiraiya-sama is correct, Naruto-kun. You don't have the strength, skill, experience or even intelligence to fight someone of my caliber. You're not Sasuke after all, so just stand aside and let real shinobi fight, seeing as how you're not even cut out to pretend being one yourself. When the gray-haired Oto spy caught Naruto's baleful glare, he sighed tiredly, unimpressed with the blonde's mean look. Put on the tough look all you want, you're just an out-of-place little genin. Sure, I expected something from that demon sealed inside Yabed, in contrast with the famed three Sannin, whom I've met face to face, you're a total disappointment. Right now, you're nothing but a tiny bug among giants. And if you get in my way, Kabuto paused as his voice lowered dangerously, I'll kill you. Jiraiya squeezed Naruto's shoulder more tightly when he felt the blonde tense for an attack. Don't, Jiraiya hissed, he's provoking you to attack. If you fall for it and just rush at him like a crazed bull, you'll only, the hell with both of them. Naruto heard enough and threw caution to the wind. Achieved through countless hours of practice, Naruto easily substituted himself with a cage bunshin and reappeared a dagger toss above the group on ground. Gathering a precise amount of chakra, Naruto crossed his forefingers and conjured 2 more cage buncheons to his side in midair and had them transform into Fuma shurikens with foot-long blades shaped like shark fins. He grasped one in each hand by the circular ring and threw them directly toward the snake Sannin and Odo spy. Both managed to see the attack coming and leapt aside as the shurikens buried into the soil where they had just been an instant before. But just as they landed, the shurikens exploded with the sound of booming thunder that sent up a cloud of dust and smoke and a shower of rock debris. Orochimaru managed to avoid the explosion, but Kabuto was struck by the rock shrapnel caused by the force of the blast radius. Several shards of stone as large as knives were buried into his cross-shielding forearms, belly, and legs. Kabuto winced as he pulled the bloody fragments from his flesh one by one. That was the buncheon back you has to. It seems little Naruto-kun does have some wit after all, he thought to himself, realizing he and his master were effectively separated. Naruto landed between them with a dull thump, his eyes on Kabuto. He must have improvisation skills nearly as good as Sasuke-kun. Leave it to an idiot to get lucky once in a while, especially since I never would have guessed a brat able to make his shadow clones explode. It's rather remarkable he improvises such measures on the fly. Boy. Hero Sannin. Naruto called over his shoulder, stop staring off into space and get after the snake bastard. Do I have to do everything in this fight? Jiraiya had a severe temptation to hit the blonde brat over his head, both for calling him that demeaning title and for ignoring his warnings and rushing off into the fray, but thought better to do as the genin suggested, considering both Orochimaru and Kabuto were their targets, and Shizune had to stay behind to watch Tsunade, since the brat was already locked in combat with the Kabuto boy. With a final glance toward the blonde and sliver-haired ninjas, Jiraiya bound ahead to Orochimaru to engage in close combat, leaving Shizune alone with the trembling Tsunade and the small pig, Taunton and Naruto's cage buncheon. With nothing to distract either of them, Naruto and Kabuto began to pace in a 10-foot-wide circle, keeping their eyes trained on the other, waiting for an opening to attack. Their steps fell in sync with each other as they passed the second circle when Naruto suddenly noted the rips and blood stains on Kabuto's shirt and pants, but no wounds were seen. Can he heal fast with some technique, or is it like a blood limit? Still keeping pace, Kabuto poked his glasses up his nose with his finger, a habit Naruto knew now to keep his hands from shaking with excitement. The blonde demon vessel narrowed his eyes. Bastard must like to spill blood. I'll give him all that and more of his own. Let's see how much you bleed, you traitorous scum. While I commend you for your earlier attack, strangely brilliant coming from an idiot such as yourself, I would highly suggest you reconsider your actions and just give up while you still can. Like a switch turned on, Kabuto's expression flashed from calm and impassive to dark and sinister. You're leagues below my strength and skill, and the only outstanding thing about you is the Kyuubi within you, and you're still a novice in combat in spite of the demon's great power. Killing you would give me no more satisfaction than crushing an ant. Thus do us all a favor and stand back like a good little boy on your hands and knees where you belong. The condescending gloat in Kabuto's voice made Naruto's blood boil in rage, but managed to rein in on his temperament before it got the better of him. If what Jiraiya said was true about Kabuto's strength, he couldn't afford to attack him in blind rage. So he said nothing, keeping pace with the silver-haired Odo spy across from himself. So long as he's in my line of sight, he can't sneak up on me. If I do lose sight of him, he can only attack from above, behind, and my side since I can hold the front. But how can I get behind him without him seeing me and deal a crippling blow? Sparing a few quick glances around himself to take in his surroundings, the desolate rocky plain sported numerous boulders and rock faces, varying in sizes from as large as men and small mountains, where little to no vegetation grew, aside from a few random placed dead trees. Of the many boulders and scattered rocks and stones strewn about the area, dozens of which were shattered, broken, or otherwise destroyed, and several large craters dotted here and there, the surface fractured like broken glass in the sheer depressions, as though struck by heavy force. Must have been Abachan, Naruto thought to himself before returning his sights to Kabuto. The blonde considered summoning a frog to aid him in fighting the Odo spy, maybe even Gamabunta, but decided against it when he realized he didn't have the chakra to summon him forth and Kabuto would attack while he was vulnerable, weaving hand signs. And even if he did summon the Kyuubi's chakra to summon a frog, Kabuto would sense the evil chakra and attack before he could use it. Guess I'll have to stick with cage buncheons and ningu to attack from a distance and take cover behind the rocks while my shadow clones provide the distraction. If he catches on to my plan too quickly, my surprise attack goes out the window. Taking the initiative, Naruto commanded the cage buncheon beside Shizune and Tsunade through their mind link to attack with kunai and shurikens at a distance to provide cover. The blonde replica instantly reacted to its commands, dug into its weapon pouches, and snapped the ningu projectiles toward the surprised Kabuto, who seemed to have forgotten about the cage buncheon Naruto substituted himself with just moments ago. The Odo spy dropped to the ground on his belly in time to allow the projectiles to pass harmlessly above, just as Naruto growled Kage Bunshin no Jutsu and a circle of blonde clones shimmered protectively around the real body. Kabuto did a rough count of about 15 shadow clones. Kabuto jumped to his feet in time to meet the rush of Naruto's shadow clones. But they didn't attack. Instead, they began running in literal circles around him and in dizzying array of zigzagging dashes. Several of the Kage Bunshin sought to encircle Kabuto from behind by leaping past and over the silver-haired teen and cut off his retreat, attempting to surround him in a circle. Acting more on instinct than thought, Kabuto dispatched at least 4 Kage Bunshins by way of shurikens and kunai before the rest were batted aside by the doppelganger's weapons. The massive orange-clothed doubles were unrelenting and attacked with lunges and kicks, keeping the Otonin constantly moving to avoid the pressing attacks, while the main body stayed behind the attacking force. Except the real Naruto wasn't in the back of his crowd of Kage Bunshins, but had already taken cover behind the rocks when his shadow clones moved into motion. Naruto kept his back against the larger rocks while systematically jumping to the next one when one or several of his Kage Bunshins shielded him from Kabuto's line of sight, slowly circling behind the unsuspecting teen, keeping an eye out from the shelter of the rocks to adjust his course when Kabuto changed position. Naruto's shadow clones were attacking in earnest now, rushing at the Odo spy in groups of 4 at once, too high and too low. The clone to Kabuto's high right lunged with a kunai ready to slash, clearly observing his right hand too wounded to stop his assault, while the other 3 provided distraction and keep the Odo spy off balance and too preoccupied to return the attack. It suddenly occurred to Naruto that perhaps Kabuto had deliberately kept his slit wrist open for some purpose. But on Kabuto's return assault, it was over. Easily leaping above the 2 low attacking clones as they stumbled under him, the silver-haired teen blocked the Kage Bunshin's kunai from his left, blinded the clone to his right by flicking the blood from his wrist into his eyes and disarmed the clone on his left with a flick of the wrist and discarded his knife to grab the doppelganger's fleece collar just as he stomped his feet onto the low attacking clones into the ground and finishing his move by throwing the disarmed doppelganger head first into the blood-blinded clone. All 4 dispersed into smoke at once. Naruto knew it was time then to enact his strategy. He commanded one of his clones through his mind link, the one staging as the main body in the back of the massive Kage Bunshins, now. Again his clone obeyed, snapping a kunai out of his pouch and throwing it straight toward Kabuto, with an explosive tag trailing behind it on a string tied on the loop hilt. Kabuto saw the knife flying toward him and hurriedly backflipped to escape the explosion to come when the kunai struck the soil. Except no explosion came. Not even any smoke. The kunai and tag were still inert. That's when Kabuto realized his error. That kunai was just a diversion. When Kabuto landed safely onto the ground near the man-sized boulders, Naruto exploded into motion and leapt from his rock cover just as Kabuto was near his hiding spot. The Kyuubi vessel delivered a jaw-breaking roundhouse kick while in midair and sent the unprepared Odo spy stumbling, reeling into the 3 waiting Kage Bunshins that had earlier encircled from behind. The first Kage Bunshin flipped out a kunai and drove the knife deep into Kabuto's belly, adding with the Odo spy's momentum and all but buried the kunai into his flesh to the hilt from the inertial weight. Kabuto grunted and choked in pain, but the first clone suddenly used Kabuto's momentum to swing the disoriented shinobi toward the second waiting Bunshin, which jabbed a powerful right hook into Kabuto's face, crushing his nose, throwing him, stumbling into the third and final Kage Bunshin, which combined a jump and a sharp right knee into Kabuto's jaw, repositioned, then back thrust kicked him in the chest. Just when Kabuto assumed the punishment was over, the real Naruto all but galloped toward the unbalanced and wounded Odo spy, body bent low to reduce air resistance, and jumped head level with Kabuto before he snapped a front kick into Kabuto's already ruined jaw, whipping his head back and sending the battered Otonin on his back several paces away with an audible crack. Naruto landed with a skid on the rocky soil. Seeing Kabuto lying still left Naruto a feeling of triumph that made him want to shout in victory, but his instincts told him this fight wasn't over because his enemy wasn't down for the count. His instincts had proved correct only seconds later. Slowly at first, then gradually gaining his bearings, Kabuto pushed himself off the ground and onto his feet. His face was a mess of splattered blood and dirt, misshapen grotesquely from the broken jaw, nose, and cheekbone. His shirt was blossoming darker with a spreading stain of blood from his belly, where Naruto's Kage Bunshin had drove his kunai into. He didn't seem to be grinning anymore. Not too bad, Naruto-kun, Kabuto said mockingly, his voice somewhat nasal sounding due his ruined nose, somehow or other still able to speak coherently with a broken jaw, but you'll need to do much better than that to beat me. And with hardly a moment's hesitation, the Odo spy gripped his nose and snapped it back into place with a sickening crunch that made Naruto's stomach twist as blood poured from his nostrils. Kabuto then re-hinged his jaw into place with an audible pop and snapped his cheekbone into place to allow his healing powers to deal with the rest, gingerly extracting the kunai from his belly and tossing the bloodied knife away. Already Naruto could see Kabuto's wounds closing and healing, leaving only the blood that saturated his clothes. His nostrils, too, stopped bleeding. When all his wounds closed, Kabuto gave Naruto a sneer. "Do tell me, Naruto-kun, if that's the extent of your skills, what else can you possibly do to me?" Naruto could think of no answer. But Jiraiya still staying at a distance, Orochimaru had watched the exchange between his servant and the demon brat with slight interest, amazed that such an untalented genin could hold his own with Kabuto, who should be many times his superior in strength, skill, and experience. Were it not for Kabuto's Genkai Keki of regenerating and replacing damaged cells, the gray-haired teen would either be dead or mortally wounded and unconscious from all the punishment he'd received. Orochimaru had seen men die from gut wounds in a slow, painful manner and knew the brat was more than he appeared. How strange such an untalented piece of trash can suddenly achieve such skill in the midst of combat. Orochimaru thought to himself as both he and Jiraiya paused in their combat, Kabuto should kill the brat quickly before he drives him into a corner, however unlikely it might seem. Orochimaru snorted that thought away. The only reason he could see how the demon brat wounded Kabuto was through the gray-haired teen's exhaustion with his fight earlier with Tsunade. Seeing as Jiraiya wasn't going to attack yet, the snake Sannin called for Kabuto by whistle, and his loyal servant came by leaping above the brat's 7 remaining cage buncheons and landed by his left side. "You're still bleeding badly," Orochimaru stated flatly, referring to Kabuto's still bleeding wrist. Kabuto nodded but didn't reply to his master's statement and said instead, "Unbandage your left arm, please, Orochimaru-sama." Orochimaru did as Kabuto bade, shaking the bandages on his left arm loose and letting them unravel onto the ground in a heap, revealing his burned ruined arms like they'd been cooked extra crispy over open flames. On his wrist was the summoning seal for conjuring serpents, shaped much like a snake that encircled his wrist like a band, a strange sigil that made up the band's head. Kabuto dabbed some blood from his bleeding wrist and smeared a line across the summoning seal, making hand signs immediately after. Jiraiya caught on to Orochimaru's game and hurriedly bit his thumb, smeared the blood on his palm and flashed through the boar, dog, bird, monkey, and ram hand seals before slapping his hand onto the ground the same time as Kabuto, spreading a web of strange sigils like flame embers outward from their palms. Explosions of smoke and dust erupted from both sides. Orochimaru and Kabuto stood perched on the head of one of the 2 giant serpent summons, nearly 100 paces high. The snakes were as large as towers with brownish-gray scale hides. If one were to measure them in human dimensions, a human would be no larger than a beetle to a man by comparison with the giant snakes. As for Jiraiya, his results were less than what he expected. Even for being poisoned. At his feet was none other than Gamakichi, a toad no bigger than a bullfrog with warty red-orange skin with a fitted hoary half-coat. Jiraiya looked down at the toadling in utter despair. "What do you want?" the toad asked in a grouchy voice. "If you want my help, give me some treats, will ya?" Naruto recognized the little toad and panned back to Jiraiya with a look of complete disbelief. "I don't know if whether I should just laugh or cry right now." Shizune could only agree with a nod, still holding protectively onto Tsunade's trembling shoulders. Above them, Orochimaru laughed mockingly at his ex-comrade's display. "There's still no cure for stupidity, Jiraiya." Aside the snake Sannin, Kabuto observed something amiss about the Gamma Sannin and brought voice to his thoughts. Tsunade-sama must have planned ahead to have the sacrifices ready and drugged him to suppress his powers. That must be why his chakra levels are imbalanced. Jiraiya grimaced when he heard the exchange. They realized his weakness. Orochimaru sneered, hardly believing a Sannin could let his guard down and let himself be poisoned. "Some things never change. You always were a fool, and today you'll die as one. Uchius no jutsu." Another explosion of smoke and dust erupted from the ground below, snapping the attention from all parties to the cloud of smoke. That voice was neither Tsunade, Jiraiya, or Orochimaru. It was Naruto. When the smoke cleared, the blonde Kyuubi vessel stood flanked by 2 frogs. One was no larger than a human child of 10 years, slick green skin and yellow eyes with oval pupils, much like an oversized tree frog with a wide underside, brown loin-cloth sash, and wielded a katana as long as himself. An ornate tattoo decorated his left leg. The second frog was considerably larger, the size of a bull, with the same dark, slick green skin as the first, but spotted with brown blotches with a red eye patch over his right eye, the left being the color of pale red. The cow-sized toad wore a white hoary half-coat trimmed blue with blotched designs speckling the coat, and the spot between his eyes was shaped like a shuriken. He held a slightly curved bronze shaft with numerous protrusions like a toad hide. It took him a second glance to realize it was a sword in a matching sheath and 4 ceramic blue jars. "Wow. It's been a long time since I seen the outside world again." The smaller frog piped almost childishly, cupping his hand above his eyes and scanning around the scenery before his gaze fell on the orange-clothed shinobi to his left. "Hi. My name's Gamafueashi. Did you summon us?" Naruto nodded, keeping his gaze on the giant serpents. "I summoned you both because Naruto thought for a moment as to how he should address his need for a summon's aid, remembering his first meeting with Gamabunta. I need some help fighting Orochimaru and his summons." He pointed to Kabuto also. "And to kill that silver-haired guy beside him." At the mention of the snake Sannin's name, Gamafueashi lost his childish demeanor and flicked his head in the direction of the towering serpents in front of him. His expression showed no mercy and total fury. There seemed to be history between the snake Sannin and the toad summons. Naruto glanced to the larger frog to his left, who seemed to be smoking from a bowl pipe. The one-eyed toad blew out a puff of smoke and said with a deep calm voice. "You ask for our assistance. It is given freely. We only await your orders." He paused, glaring with his one eye at the snake swaying anxiously above them, awaiting their orders from their summoner. "I go by the name Gamakudo. Now let's get this show on the road. I feel like having some snakes skewered over a fire." Orochimaru waited long enough. He turned to Kabuto just as his serpent was moving into motion. "You handled Tsunade, while I take care of Jiraiya. If her apprentice or the Kyuubi brat get in your way, kill them." When the serpent surged toward the group below, Kabuto leapt to the next snake's head, aiming the serpent toward Tsunade and Naruto with his summons, as his master veered his respective snake toward the Gama Sennin. Too bad, Kabuto thought. I really wanted to try fighting Jiraiya-sama since I had some practice against Tsunade-sama. Oh, well. Master's orders come first. The group on ground scattered as the giant snakes crashed into the ground, throwing up a shower of earth debris hundreds of feet high in the sky, with an equally large cloud of upturned smoke and dust. Naruto hopped back and forth off the larger man-sized stones, still airborne toward his frog summons not 20 yards away from his position. The quick glance to right front showed Shizune carrying Tsunade off to a safer distance, leaping off airborne stones and rocks like himself. He lost sight of Iro Sennin. A glance downward revealed Gamakichi and Taunton scurrying for safety behind some nearby rock outcroppings. His cage buncheons were nowhere in sight. Shooting out of the cloud of dust and debris, Kabuto's snake summon lunged out with its cavernous mouth gaping wide open large enough to swallow a tower whole to swallow Naruto and his summons in one bite, just as Kabuto jumped off the snake's head and bound after Shizune and Tsunade. When Gamafueashi and Kudo jumped off some falling debris toward safety, Naruto realized the snake was coming for him alone. He gave a shout of surprise as the snake's mouth closed down on him and saw only darkness. Kabuto easily caught up to Shizune and Tsunade as soon as the shower of debris settled. The medic nin apprentice rolled up her sleeve and snapped her poison needle slinger strapped on her wrist and let fly 5 small needles the size of pins. Kabuto dodged the tiny projectiles and dashed inside Shizune's guard before the woman could raise a defense and took Kabuto's chakra and Jinto straight to the chest, cutting into her chest muscles. She grimaced in pain, deposited Tsunade on the ground by shoving her behind a large stone, and expelled a cloud of foul brown-green poisonous gas from her mouth. Kabuto recognized the gas as the Dokijiri no Jutsu. He couldn't stop his forward momentum, but managed to inhale a lungful of air in time, just before he ran headlong into the mist, holding his breath. "One whiff of this mist and I'm dead." Kabuto managed to halt in a skid and peered at the ground under his feet. "I'll attack from underground. Doten. Dachu Ijo no Jutsu." Shizune gave a sigh of relief and victory, seeing as Kabuto wasn't coming out of the poisonous mist she spewed. He must have either died and collapsed on his second step into the cloud of gas. Shizune heard the sound of shattering rock a fraction of a second too late before hands gripped her ankles and felt a pain like her legs had been cut with a serrated knife. Her legs buckled involuntarily and she fell to her knees, gripping her thighs in pain with a strangled groan. Her ankle tendons had been severed. Kabuto crawled out of the rocky ground, his hands still glowing green with the chakra and Jinto still in effect. A glance to his left showed Tsunade was huddled against a nearby stone, still shivering. Her apprentice was still on the ground clutching her legs in futile attempt to alleviate the pain his chakra scalpels had wrought. Tsunade was no threat at the moment, so he might as well kill Shizune, just to make sure she didn't interfere later. Besides, Orochimaru still needed his arms healed and they could persuade the medic nin to do so later. Before he took another step towards Shizune, however, a sword pierced through his lower back and out his belly, spilling his blood. He gasped at the unexpected flare of pain and sagged, clutching the protruding blade with one hand while looking over his shoulder at his new attacker. Gamafueashi grinned at him with his katana held tightly in his green hands. "Master said to kill you. I know like killing humans, but you reek of snakes. Killing you be fun if you give me some sport. Hope you're fast." Kabuto snarled in fury and rage at such a pitiful creature wounding him. Fueashi pulled his katana out the gray-haired Odo spy's body and hopped back well out of reach, nearly 10 yards away, falling into a defensive stance with his sword tip pointing down, lower than the hilt. Kabuto hardly even felt the pain from the summoned sword withdraw, his nerves immune to pain sensory as his blood limit took full effect. All traces of clear-minded clarity vanished from his eyes, which were suddenly becoming the color of primal red, like fresh spilt blood. Likewise, the veins in his arms, neck and temple suddenly swelled grotesquely like lattice work, his muscles expanded and hardened until he grew half again his weight and half a foot in height. Wisps of blue and green chakra energy boiled from his pores like smoke, intermingling into a sea blue-green color. His voice tremble seemed deeper too, with every inhale and exhale, it sounded like a bear's deep breathing. The pierce wound through his torso regenerated within seconds, smoking as if searing shut with a hot pick. Despite Fueashi seeing the Odo nin's wound heal before his eyes, he resolutely stayed in his defensive posture, ready for the gray-haired teenager's next move. The air was ripe with chakra, so much so that the frog-summoned skin was tingling like a current of electricity raced through his flesh. The Odo spy Kabuto, as his summoning master had called him, had more than 4 times his own chakra capacity and was most likely much more skilled. Fueashi knew his speed was unrivaled, a few humans have passed being the minor exceptions, and he could easily evade the bulkier ninja and keep cutting him until he died of blood loss or he scored a mortal blow. He just hoped it was enough. Fueashi blinked involuntarily and suddenly Kabuto was right in front of him, swinging a hard kick toward his unguarded left side. The blow hit like a sledgehammer and threw the light frog summon several yards away, skidding on the dirt and dropping his katana from his limp hands. He managed to keep himself from being dispelled back into the summoning plane, but fell unconscious in 3 seconds. Kabuto didn't have time to revel in his minor victory over the smaller frog summon. A surge of chakra energy flared from behind him and distantly heard a deep voice like bubbling mudspout Suiton. Tepidama. Before twin spheres of water crashed into his back, blasting the wind from his chest, splashing his clothes, and sending him forward with his back arched from the impact. He flew several feet away from his previous standing point and skidded to a halt on unsteady legs. He swiveled around in a flourish, snarling in rage and fury at who and whatever struck him in the back. Amakuto's eye glared like a razor-sharp dagger at the Odo spy, his sword drawn pointing toward Kabuto, while his free hand was held in a flat palm like a silence gesture under his chin. "Don't presume you've beaten us so soon. Our master has yet to finish you off himself. Finish me off." Kabuto repeated incredulously at the giant amphibian, his voice many times deeper from his blood limits activation. "Your master can't even be called a decent shinobi, much less kill someone the likes of me. You should take your own advice and not presume such preposterous claims. Besides, he's already dead, swallowed by Orochimaru-sama's summoned snake. What can he do when?" Kabuto's words were cut short when a rumbling explosion rocked the air. Kabuto turned back around, ignoring the potential threat of turning his back to the frog summon, and looked at the snake summon which swallowed the demon vessel, nearly 100 yards away. Chunks of flesh and bone flew through the air and rained down a drizzle of serpent blood. Pieces of rendered flesh as large as men thudded to the ground, splattering scarlet liquid with sounds like wet sponges smacking a hard flat surface. The brownish-gray snake swooned and swayed its massive head into Kabuto's line of sight and saw an enormous hole dominating the span between the serpent's eyes, blood pouring like a waterfall out the hole with abandon. The snake bore a confused expression, as if it didn't realize the opening in its head would sooner or later lead the summon into its death throes, but then gravity took hold of its weakening body and brought it crashing down to earth with a land-shaking quake. There it stayed, still as death. Amidst the fleshy debris of fragmented pieces of meat and bone, Naruto walked out behind a particularly large chunk of snackaflesh on wobbly legs, though a grin threatened to split his face in two, an expression usually tied to when he accomplished something to be proud of. From blonde-haired head to feet, snake blood was soaked into his clothes, covering his skin, leaking into his mouth, which he quickly spat out, and obscuring his Hittite leaf engraving. Kabuto stared at the bloodied genin for a long moment, unable to grasp how the demon vessel had just killed one of Orochimaru's summons. His face quickly screwed up into a scowl. "What the hell did you do just now?" Naruto just grinned some more, thinking back to when the serpent took him into its jaws. Darkness dominated his vision, and several tons of muscled serpent jaws pressed down on him from above and below, barely managing to hold the giant serpent's mouth from crushing him completely with his straining arms and legs. Every in and withdrawn breath made his chest feel tight and knew without prodding that his muscles were tearing with the effort to hold death at bay. Frantically Naruto tried to surmise a plan to escape from his precarious position, but nothing came to mind that would save him. Filling the cavernous mouth with cage buncheons to force the mouth open wouldn't do any good, as he had done with the snake in the forest of death in the second part of the Chunin exam. He couldn't afford to squander his chakra after conjuring so many clones and summoning the frogs, which he couldn't say for certain how they were faring at the moment. Using an exploding clone was a no-go considering he, too, would get caught in the blast and only speed up his premature demise. Think, goddammit, think. Naruto muttered with a groan. The snake's mouth smelled terrible, like a sour of rotting meat and ammonia-like aroma, similar to stale piss. He gagged with disgust when he breathed it in. Snake mucus was saturating his thick clothes and his chest was feeling tighter with every passing second. There wasn't enough oxygen in the snake's orifice to sustain him for long. Then it came to him. The technique Jiraiya had been teaching him, his only chance to escape. Problem is, my hands are a little preoccupied keeping the snake's mouth from crushing me, Naruto thought with a visible grimace. I can't make the Rasengan with one hand, I need both to gather and compress the energy. The answer smacked him in the face. I'll use Bunshin to hold up the snake's mouth and use the Rasengan. He looked up at the ridged roof of the giant serpent's mouth and suddenly looked doubtful. I hope this works. He said under his breath, slowly easing one hand down and brought his forefingers up in a silence gesture whilst the other strained to hold the roof of the snake's mouth up above his head. Gathering energy and molding it into his designs, Naruto conjured 3 cage bunshins to his side, 2 rushing to hold the snake's mouth open, the third to assist the Kyuubi vessel. Remembering the lessons he'd pounded into his memory, Naruto brought his chakra to his hand, made the energy spin, and poured out a greater amount of energy into his palm. As much as he would have liked to do this without the aid of his shadow clone, he knew he wouldn't be able to execute this technique properly without it. Then the cage bunshin was at his side, using its hands to compress the chakra that madly spinning now like a vortex, whips of wind lashing out before gathering into Naruto's clenched hand. The cage bunshin's hands were now moving at blinding speed, molding the chakra into a sphere like it was molding clay, until at last it was done after 10 seconds of painstaking concentration. Held in Naruto's palm was a perfect sphere of spiraling blue and white winds twisting, spinning, and interweaving within a transparent barrier ball, no larger than a fist. As if an entire hurricane storm was trapped within a glass sphere, it trembled with pent-up power and screamed with a sound like metal plates grinding against one another on an axle, begging to be unleashed. He granted the sphere's wish. With a roar that shook through the snake trapping the blonde genin, Naruto blasted his technique into the roof of the snake's mouth. Rasengan. Naruto just grinned all the more. Take a wild guess, dimwit. Kabuto's eyes smoldered like flaming coals. He dashed forward with his hands glowing with chakra, aiming to use his chakra in Jinto and wound the blonde wannabe shinobi, heedless of leaving behind Shizune, who was frantically trying to heal her ankles as quickly as possible to aid Naruto. The Kyuubi vessel didn't need any more aid than what he had already. Gamakuro agilely hopped between Kabuto and his summoner and chopped with sword to Kabuto's head, missed as the Odo spy ducked the slash, then reversed the strike into a downward thrust that nearly impaled Kabuto through his back before he leaped to the side in a desperate move to avoid further injury, rolling onto his back and absorbing the fall before riding the momentum onto his feet. Movement from the corner of his eye alerted Kabuto just in time to evade the strike from the cage bunshin that had snuck up on him from behind, ducking under the shadow clone's roundhouse kick, only to find another cage bunshin rushing at him from behind another large boulder and snapped a handful of shurikens his way, several of which found the flesh of his arms and chest, but not his throat, as the shadow clone had intended. Kabuto backflipped some 10 yards away to gather his bearings as the last 2 cage bunshins stepped out from the cover of the boulders dotting the battleground. Seems Naruto-kun's cage bunshin survived the snake's attack better than I assumed, Kabuto thought to himself with a hint of annoyance, angrily yanking out the shurikens from his flesh, but now it's time to end this fight. I've expended too much chakra already and I'll need my strength to subdue Tsunade-sama. Naruto had no time to prepare himself for Kabuto's surprise attack, weak as he was with having already used his gambit technique, Rasengan. In the blink of an eye, the Otonin closed the distance between them, passing by Gamakuro, and drove a sharp right knee into the Kyuubi vessel's jaw, breaking several of the blonde's teeth and snapping his head back sharply, leaving the demon vessel stunned from the unexpected blow. He crumpled to the ground on his knees and fell face first into the dirt without a sound. Consciousness fell away from him as Gamakuro rushed to aid his master. While the battle below waged between summon and ninja, Orochimaru and Jiraiya fought desperately against each other as their handicaps left them fighting zealously to end their conflict quickly. The serpent summon, which was still alive and carried the snake Sannin to attack Jiraiya, was now no more than a helpless spectator as its summoner, and the white-haired old man fought to the death atop its vast size, unable to move more than its head when Jiraiya used his Doten. Yamanuma no Jutsu and conjured a giant swamp of dark, foul and viscous mud tar that left the snake bogged down like an insect trapped in a glob of sap. At the moment, Orochimaru had his fanged jaws clamped tightly onto Jiraiya's throat, his right foot impaled by the Gama Sennin's Harijizo no Jutsu's many needle-sharp spines to hold the cloak of sharp hair to one side. Jiraiya realized his jutsu wasn't powerful enough to deter his ex-comrade from attacking and was quickly losing oxygen. Even with us both having handicaps, there's no contest between us. Orochimaru slurred with his jaws still holding onto Jiraiya's throat tightly, give it up and just die. Jiraiya answered with a hard kick to the snake Sennin's chest that threw him back 10 steps and released his throat as the Gamma Sennin gasped for air and dispelled his Harijizo, letting his wild hair return to normal. He rubbed his sore throat just when Orochimaru got to his feet. At least the bastard snake hadn't punctured his arteries. Just when he thought he could get a break and regain his breath, Orochimaru rushed at him once more and Jiraiya hopped back across the giant snake's hide in a hasty retreat. The two Sannin clashed as they hopped across the giant snake summon's exposed length, both unable to deal a devastating blow to the other. This exchange of blows went on for many minutes and showed no sign of ending. Both Sannins had been aware of a sudden discharge of chakra and heard the explosion before their sights turned to the second snake with a giant hole in its head, swaying this way and that before collapsing onto the ground, dead. Jiraiya's praise to Naruto for actually managing to use the Rasengan so well after so short a time on practicing with it died in his throat when Kabuto attacked the unprepared genin and left him unconscious with only a handful of cage buncheons that hadn't been dispersed and left Gamakuto to fight the superior Odo spy. Within a minute of the fight between the frog summon and Kabuto, Jiraiya caught a glance of Naruto getting to his feet, if unsteadily, and hadn't yet been noticed by Kabuto, who was having trouble fending off the bull-sized frog and Gamafueashi, whom seemed to have finally regained consciousness and double-teamed the gray-haired teenager. Just when Jiraiya thought the fight would turn to their favor, Shizune rushed up from behind to Kabuto's back and snapped her needles which Kabuto ducked and used the minor distraction to slip under her guard and drove his fist hard into her cheek and knocked her into oblivion. The frog summons rushed at Kabuto's back with their swords poised to thrust and kill the Otanin, but were unprepared for their prey, suddenly throwing Shizune in the way, forcing the frogs to divert their blade points away, just as Kabuto used Shizune as his shield cover and delivered a chakra Jinto chop to both their rubbery chests, swatting them aside several feet in opposite directions where they lay still and knocked out. Weak as he was at the moment, Naruto still tried to help his summons and Shizune, but barely took 3 stumbling steps forward when Kabuto jumped into the air, landed in front of the disoriented genin in a crouch, and snapped a hard roundhouse kick to the blonde's shoulder, sending him crashing into the dirt with his arm stunned numb and nearly broken. Tried as he might, he had no more strength left to even stand. All he could do was curse in the dirt and watch helplessly as Kabuto sauntered over to Tsunade's trembling form and proceeded to beat her half to death while the blonde woman could only raise a feeble defense against Kabuto's taunting punches, slaps, and kicks. It can't end like this, Naruto thought savagely, straining his arms to push himself up. I won't let it end like this. Damn it all, I can barely move. Let me out. Naruto stopped dead in his tracks figuratively speaking when he heard that demonic voice, a deep Baseto-like distant thunder rumbling from within a cave, echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. Uzumaki recognized that voice as only the Kyuubi no Kitsune's, the 9-tailed demon fox sealed within his belly. His temples were suddenly throbbing with pain in concert with his pounding pulse, like his head was ready to crack open from within. His strangled groan sounded like a wounded animal's. Let me cut them, let me tear them, let me rip them apart. No. I can't, he won't give in. Despite his efforts, Naruto knew it was only time before the Kyuubi took control and sent him on a bloodthirsty rampage, most likely killing everyone and everything within a 10-mile radius to sate the demon's lust for death and destruction. You can't do anything right now, little insect. Give me control and I'll send these pieces of trash to the bowels of hell. Give me control and I'll kill them for you. No. You're lying. You won't stop at Orochimaru and Kabuto, you'll kill Abe-chan and Iro-sennin and everyone else here to sate your malice. Kyuubi laughed, a guttural Baseto rumble that Naruto felt in his chest. For being such an idiot, you know me well. But really, what choice do you have at the moment? Your consciousness is falling and will leave your mind open for my chakra to control your body. You can no more stop my possession than you can stop a storm with your hands. No, Naruto felt his will draining. Sweat beaded down his face and into his eyes with a mental strain to hold the Kyuubi back. His efforts were in vain, it was like pushing against an ocean surging tide, powerful and relentless, crashing into his defenses and leaving him more weakened than before. Give me blood, give me flesh, give me screams, give me pain, give me death, give him a freedom. Naruto's scream shattered the eerie silence in the field, his back arching painfully while on his knees as his skull pounded from the onslaught of Kyuubi's will breaking his own. Suddenly everyone on the battleground clutched their heads in agony as Kyuubi's voice thundered into all their minds and pushed them to their knees. Jiraiya and Orochimaru grimaced tightly while Kabuto and Tsunade, being much closer to Naruto, felt the effects much more clearly and bled from their ears, nostrils, and eyes from the pain and mental pressure. But just as quickly as it appeared, the pressure vanished. When Kabuto looked up to face the orange-clad genin, the hairs on his skin suddenly stood on end as a pulse of malevolent energy rippled from Naruto's slack form through the ground and the air itself. His arms and head were dangling down as if held up like a motionless marionette, but his bent legs were flexed and held him up on his feet. As he watched translucent red and orange chakra swirl and twist around the demon vessel's slouched form, slowly swirling upward gathering above the motionless shinobi before it formed the unmistakable shape of a fox's head. The chakra manifested sentry above the blonde genin suddenly lifted and pointed its snout up in the sky and bellowed an earth-shaking roar, so loud and deafening, it ripped the ground apart from beneath his feet and leveled a glare full of malevolence at Kabuto, leaving the Otonin standing on unsteady legs. But just as the largest and most destructive fires burned away, the Kyuubi sentry dispersed into tongues of red chakra like flaming embers and swirled into a spiral path down back into Naruto's body, coalescing onto his clothes and seeping into his body. As he watched a heart-stopping spectacle, Kabuto had a distinct desire to either kill him while he was defenseless or run as far away as possible in the other direction. Of course, the former option was non-negotiable, considering the waves of killer intent held him frozen and locked his muscles in place far more effectively than Orochimaru's killing intent had ever accomplished, and the latter course was equally impossible with his feet rooted to the spot. Dread suddenly filled his chest and left his heart hammering against his ribs and his mouth dry as he waited for whatever that was happening to end. He did not have to wait long. Within the span of several heartbeats, the demonic chakra finally receded into Naruto's body, leaving his back and shoulders smoldering like steam was rising from him on a dark and cold night, the secondary effects of the Kyuubi's energy coursing through his veins which superheated his flesh. His blonde spiky hair became more wild, frazzled, and when he lifted his head to face Kabuto and Tsunade, his dark-rimmed eyes were a deep crimson with vertical slits, his whisker scars were broader and darker, and his canines and incisors grew larger and more pointed like a predator's. Every wound previously suffered during the heat of the battle sizzled and his flesh healed like heated wax merging back together. But his transformation wasn't over. An animalistic growl escaped his throat as shimmering transparent red energy bubbled from his skin, enveloping his body into a cocoon of yauki that shaped into the form of large fox, where two spikes of chakra extended from the head to resemble ears, the energy around the hands to form finger-length claws, and a thick, tapering extension of red yauki to lengthen from just below his lower back to look like a foxtail. Naruto brought his hands up and looked at them, now bearing sharp claws in place of his fingernails enveloped within his bodily energy cocoon, as if for the first time he'd seen them. His gaze panned back and forth, inspecting himself. The air itself crackled and hissed with malevolent heat and power. Having more experience with the workings of his seals, Jiraiya knew something was wrong. Not only was Naruto's behavior different as well as the appearance of the chakra's shape, but his chakra signature was no longer recognizable. It wasn't like when he brought forth some energy from Kyuubi like when he summoned Gamabunta, conjuring the energy that overlapped and combined with his normal chakra. The Kyuubi's energy now felt like it dominated his host, pushing down Naruto's human chakra deeper into his body and almost smothering it. Jiraiya's fears were confirmed when the orange-clad genin grinned as only a fox could. Naruto wasn't controlling his body anymore. Kyuubi was now in control. The demon fox appraised the feel of his vessel's body and sensations, which the Kyuubi had been deprived of for over 13 years. The sweet tangy scent of blood in the air, the feel of the wind's caress on his skin and the muscles in his limbs flexing and coiling, the sights of the battlefield and the colors he could see again, instead of the dreary darkness of the cell he'd been imprisoned in. 13 years to a demon who had lived over several millennia was a trifling amount of time, no more than a grain of sand in an Herglis, but inside the seal he'd been caged within, unable to kill or walk free on his own feet, every second inside his pitiful vessel's body felt like a century. Kyuubi lifted his gaze toward the silver-haired human with glasses and smirked a feral grin. He'll have some fun breaking and killing this one before moving on to killing the two fighting Sannins and finally sating his pent-up carnal lusts with the two present women. The big-breasted blonde and the unconscious slim woman. 13 years trapped inside a whelp without sex left him desperate to appease his urges. Just before the demon fox took another step, however, a rumble shook the ground beneath his feet, drawing his attention to the bog giant serpent, trapped inside a lake-sized swamp of black tar like an insect held fast by tree sap. The serpent's cold slitted eyes glared hungrily at him and the 5 others around him. Kabuto, Tsunade, Shizune, and his vessel's 2 frog summons. Kyuubi wasn't concerned about its presence, and aside from a grimace of distaste and disgust at the creature, he turned away from it to once again face Kabuto. Another rumble quaked from under his feet, this one even stronger than last, jostling the demon fox and nearly tripping him. He swiveled back around to face the giant snake again and saw the serpent using its chin to drag its body from the swamp while undulating the freed portion of his body back onto land, slowly freeing itself from its brief viscous prison, much of its long body covered in muck and tar. As the limbless reptile was dragging its slithering body out, it glared an undisputed challenge at him, demanding a fight for the sport before the awaited feast. The Kyuubi's face twisted into an expression of savage fury. How dare that slithering length of trash challenge him? He was Kyuubi no Kitsune, feared and revered throughout the land the span of history. He turned cities to dust, sunk whole continents beneath oceans, raised worlds across the deep endlessness of space itself beyond the Earth's spherical boundaries, killed billions just for the sake of sating his desire for death and destruction, and this pretentious belly-crawling abomination dared challenge him. The two Sennins Jiraiya and Orochimaru, if Kyuubi wasn't mistaken from the influx of images and whisperings he skimmed through his vessel's memories, quickly leapt off the Serpent's back to resume their battle elsewhere as the snake finally pulled itself from its mucky confinement, swaying and hissing in satisfaction in its freedom. Kyuubi glanced behind him and saw the gray-haired Otanin now on guard and half-crouched, ready to bolt into a fast run at any moment. He clearly thought the snake would make a difference against him. Kyuubi couldn't help but smirk at the fool's sheer audacity and stupidity. Pretentious little insect, the Kyuubi thought with a chuckle, your pet can no more harm me than a fly stripped of its wings. And once I'm finished with it, you'll be next. The giant serpent coiled its body into a heap and flicked a yellow forked tongue in the air, as wide as a man's waist, tasting the scent of its newly selected prey. Leveling its sights and head into position, the snake summon lunged with its cavernous mouth spread wide open to swallow Kyuubi whole. On the edge of Kyuubi's peripheral vision, he caught sight of Kabuto breaking into a fast sprint to avoid the snake's jaws, while Tsunade, barely conscious and on the ground from having suffered Kabuto's earlier beatings, could only watch with wide eyes. Just as the snake's mouth snapped closed to bite Kyuubi and impale the demon-possessed vessel on its column-long fangs, the red chakra haze surrounding Demon Fox's hands shot out and extended like rubber before Kyuubi's Yaokai's clawed fingers caught the snake's jaws before they could close on him, holding them pried open with his greater strength granted by his demonic chakra, while anchoring his feet to the ground with chakra and holding the serpent in place. Tremors shook through the giant snake summon's body as it strained to close its mouth on its prey, but instead of them closing on the demon, Kyuubi slowly, deliberately, moved the snake's jaws closer to himself and gripped them with his flesh and blood hands before a fanged grin broke out across his face. It was at that point that the giant serpent realized its doom was approaching. Its efforts were no longer focused on attack, but now on retreat, struggling against the Kyuubi's iron-gripped hold on its mouth, trying to use its greater size and coiling its body into a bunched position to leverage its head away by pulling up where the smaller demon could have no hand or foothold. Its struggles were in vain. Kyuubi's grip on the snake's jaws were unbreakable, and with his feet glued to the earth beneath him, this snake was going nowhere. It might as well have stayed trapped in Jiraiya's swamp. At least then it would have had a chance to escape the Kyuubi's fury. The demon fox decided to end its struggles. Gathering his chakra to his vessel's legs, he released it outward in an explosion of bursting transparent blue energy with a boom like thunder from under his feet that propelled him into a rapid side-winding spin in a corkscrew motion, still holding the snake's jaws and twirling the giant summon's funnel-shaped body like a rolling log. The giant snake's head and body scraped, whipped and flopped against the ground as Kyuubi continued his spin relentlessly, gaining momentum by the minute and seeming to hang in midair as the giant snake summon's neck began to twist like a rope and constrict, snapping bones and tendons, ripping and mangling thick muscles until, with a sound like wet cloth shredding apart, Kyuubi ripped the serpent's head off from its twisted neck. The headless body thrashed and flailed like a worm while its neck pumped a waterfall of scarlet liquid onto the ground, filling the air with the sweet tangy scent of iron and copper. Heaving the dead weight head aside with his enormous strength in midair, the demon fox landed lightly onto his feet and faced the gray-haired Oto spy, the teenager's expression an amusing mixture of shock and fear at the feat he had just witnessed. When at last the snake summon's headless corpse stilled, the Kyuubi grinned seditiously. "Don't blink, human scum." Against his better judgment and instincts, Kabuto blinked out of reflex. Kyuubi exploded into motion in the same instant, closing the distance between him and Kabuto in a flash-quick leap, and sank his fist deeply into the medic nin's belly and sent the gray-haired teen flying several dozen feet back before he crashed into one of the many boulders strewn about the dry, rocky field with a sundering explosion. The curtain of rock and debris flew up from where he crashed and showered the 10-meter area around him. Stumbling, barely managing to stand on his weakened legs, Kabuto emerged from the rubble of the boulder he had crashed into, cradling his stomach in agony with his eyes and mouth wide in a silent scream of pain. Just the expression Kyuubi savored to watch in a fight to the death. Watching his victims writhe helplessly in pain before the coup de grace. At that point, the battle was then a one-sided beating where Kyuubi would deliver blow after killing blow against his resilient prey, yet no matter how many times he shattered Kabuto's ribs or broke his neck and limbs with devastating kicks, punches or tail whips back and forth across the battlefield, the pretentious little piece of human trash just wouldn't die. Instead, his body kept healing the damage done to it just in time to save the pathetic human from death before the demon fox struck him again. Kyuubi could wait, he'd have his fun tenderizing the whelp into hamburger before he crushed his skull under his foot. Or maybe he should rip his head off, crush his chest into a pancake, then rip his limbs off slowly. In a different order. The demon couldn't decide which to do first as he thrust-kicked Kabuto's limp form into another boulder. But such concerns didn't bother the demon. Slow and agonizing forms of torture were all the same to him, the only difference that mattered were the volume of screams, the agony he delivered, and the unanswered pleas for mercy. Kyuubi grinned throughout Kabuto's beating. Murky. Dark. Stagnant. Silent. Empty. Those 5 words were all that were needed to describe the Kyuubi's prison cell. Shackles bound Naruto's wrists, connected to glowing red chains like they were fresh from the forge, and bolted to the parallel walls to his side. No matter how hard he yanked and tugged on his restraints, they barely moved, and the sigils didn't even seem to chafe or grind against one another when he moved them. They held taut and held no slack to allow him any leverage, holding his arms up above his head in a standing, spread eagle position. His heels weren't even touching the bottom of the flooded floor, and he had to stand on the balls of his feet to keep himself from falling limp and having the chains pull his arms under his weight, which would result in his chest cavity being squeezed. The blonde genin had to give the Kyuubi due credit in its accomplishment. He never would have believed the demon fox could slip past a seal, just as Naruto was unconsciously drawing the Kyuubi's chakra to heal his battle wounds, but it seemed the millennia-old demon planned brilliantly to use his chakra to bypass his vessel's warded defenses and establish a link directly into Naruto's mind in the same time, using the demon's chakra energy. Thus Kyuubi pulled himself free from the seal's confinements, since the seal's range was only limited to confining the demon, not everything else it connected to, such as his vessel's mind. All he had needed was his chakra to flood inside his vessel's mind, and he could transfer, or that is to say, switch minds between the seal and Naruto's mind itself like the two sides to a bridge. The stagnant water was bone-chilling cold, flooding the prison chamber halfway up his shins. The tall, iron-barred gates loomed high above as a testament to his insignificance, and the dark gloom was making his eyes ache from the strain, with the torches bolted on the side walls, preventing his eyes to adjust to the darkness, while not providing enough illumination for him to see clearly. One single thought still raced through the bound genin's mind, despite the futility of his present predicament. How could he escape? In what felt like hours passed in silence, Naruto didn't dare even try to speak to himself to give himself some comfort from the solitude, if even one wasted breath would spell his doom. A distant plinking like water droplet smacking the flooded water's surface was driving Naruto mad with irritation. He'd counted over 1,000 already, and by the time he counted 1,500, he was just about to scream out his irritation to the heavens above when a splash sounded beyond the seal gates, from inside the corridors outside the seal's chamber. Several more followed the first, falling into a rhythm of footsteps. After several tense minutes, a figure finally emerged from the hazy darkness. Distantly he wondered who or what it was approaching him when, after taking a clear sight of him, all thought process stopped. Standing just outside the iron-barred doors, no more than 3 paces away from Naruto, was himself. No, not himself entirely. There were some subtle differences between them. The lookalike had no whisker scars, and his eyes were pale blue instead of indigo. He wore just standard black trousers and long-sleeved shirt, except the clothes were so dark, they seemed to melt and merge with darkness of the shadows, obscuring his form's outline. Where his form began and ended, Naruto could not see. "Who the hell are you?" Naruto asked, unable to stop himself, "and why the hell do you look just like me?" The lookalike just smirked or sneered, rather too much like Orochimaru, that left Naruto feeling a faint pang of dread fill his gut. Not even Kyuubi drew such an immediate reaction from him after just one facial expression. "For your first question," the lookalike said, his voice just like Naruto's, only slightly more deep and clear, "I don't really have a name per se, but I suppose for the time being, you can call me Doki." Naruto couldn't help but stare at his lookalike strangely. His name meant wrath. "As for your second question, the reason I look just like you is that I am you. Or rather, a different part of yourself you locked away, deep inside the recesses of your mind. I am the part of your rage incarnate, you might say. I am part of your sentience that first learned of the emotions such as hate and resentment, jealousy and anger. You instinctively created me when you were first thrown out of the orphanage, and you learned that the people of your village hated you without reason that you understood, thus you hated them in turn. I am the manifestation of that same distant psyche. You could call me your mirror opposite." Naruto glanced away, uncomfortable with the memories Doki just had him recall. "But enough of that nonsense now, that's all in the past. The reason why I'm here is simple. When the Kyuubi's chakra tapped into your mind and overwhelmed your control, he had unintentionally released me from the mental barriers your unconscious mind created to seal me away. But because that demon fox is on the rampage and is too focused on kicking Kabuto's worthless hide back and forth across the plane at the moment, he hasn't yet noticed his chakra is currently damaging your body more swiftly than it can heal. I'm here to stop that, and to do that, I need your help to free yourself and retake control of your body. That's a very interesting proposal, Doki, Naruto drawled in exasperation, but how in the hell do you expect me to be of any help while I'm chained inside this wet cell? Doki just smiled knowingly. Do you not yet understand the nature of the seal and how it works with your body? When Naruto shook his head in negative, the lookalike continued, basically, your body is the prison, but the seal itself is the gate, which draws the Kyuubi's chakra and filters it into your chakra system. Seeing as Kyuubi is presently absent, those bonds around your wrists can be removed if you channel your regular chakra into them and break them. Naruto stared dumbly at Doki. The seal on your belly binds you and the Kyuubi together, your minds, but even your souls. Including your chakras. The Kyuubi said so himself to you when you and he first met face to face. Neither can live without the other. Naruto's expression turned suspicious in a heartbeat. If what you said is true about me needing you to regain control of my mind and body, why are you willing to help me? What do you want in exchange? Doki's sneer returned tenfold. Not quite so much the hopeless fool as before after all. There's hope for you yet. The fact is, there is something I want from you. To share your mind, your consciousness, and allow me to become merged with your present psyche. And why should I trust you that you won't just take over my mind like Kyuubi? Naruto asked while glaring accursedly at his mirror opposite. The lookalike sneered knowingly. Because you don't have any other choice. How long they both leveled their gazes at each other, neither could have guessed. Naruto was loath to admit it, but Doki spoke the truth. Without his help, Kyuubi could not be stopped and would just continue his rampage until, sooner or later, he set his sights on Konohagakure no Sado and carry out his revenge for his defeat, leaving the few friends Naruto had at the mercy of a merciless monster, all too willing to spill blood. On the other hand, was he really willing to have a darker personality merge with his and be unable to endure the future consequences of his change of identity? Naruto knew there was no more time for such deliberation. He had to choose the lesser of the two evils. Alright, he said, I'll do it. Doki's face twisted into a satisfied grin. Prepare yourself, then, he said as his shape shimmered briefly before dispersing into black smoke and surging through the iron-barred doors and up Naruto's nostrils, his eyes, his mouth, and ears. Naruto reflexively snapped back, his face twisted in revulsion at the lingering sensation of the thing's touch, smell, and taste. That readded the disembodied voice of Doki inside Naruto's thoughts, cause I'm giving you due warning right now, this will hurt like a bitch. The flare of pain erupted from Naruto's temple, dwarfing the pain Kyuubi had him experience only moments ago. The pain was like a giant serrated wedge of rusted iron was being hammered into his temple, boring more deeply into his skull, with each pounding pulse of his rib-shaking heartbeat. He distantly heard a scream sounding from somewhere far away, only able to barely perceive that it was himself that was screaming. And then, with a crack like shattering metal, his shackles snapped. Kyuubi halted in his motion of kicking Kabuto when he sensed something amiss within his perception around the seal. And then there was a faint sound like something had snapped from far away. Kyuubi only realized what happened after he felt the same pain his vessel's body had endured after he had made the precaution of numbing the pain receptors. His chakra was receding back into the seal. And with his demonic energy, his connection with his vessel's mind. So sorry, demon, but your occupancy has expired. Kyuubi had no chance to question whose voice had spoken, or if it had even been his vessel's, sounding slightly deeper and sibilant. All the demon fox could do was roar in pain from the damaging effects of his own chakra, slowly breaking down his vessel's body. The agony made his vision flare white, then suddenly dim black around the edges of his vision, before it slowly enveloped his sight, and he saw only darkness. When at last he opened his eyes, the Kyuubi roared and howled in absolute fury. The sight that met him was behind the barred doors of his cell. You weren't exaggerating about the pain being a bitch, you sadistic bastard. Contrary to Naruto's humorous thought, he felt anything but fine. It took all of the orange-cladded genin's willpower to keep himself from bellowing in pain after Kyuubi's chakra cocoon receded back into the seal. His limbs were on fire, his muscles must have multiple tears, and the pain receptors all across his body were flaring with agony from the corrosive effects of Kyuubi's chakra. It was a miracle his body hadn't been torn apart sooner. Lying in a crumpled heap only 10 paces away, Kabuto finally stirred from having recently taken a devastating blow, his chakra healing the damage once more, only much more slowly than before, meaning his chakra supply was diminishing. His clothes were a mess of tatters and stained with blotches of red from his previous wounds. His glasses were on the ground beside his head, the lenses broken and cracked. His gaze searched Naruto's form, sensing for the powerful demonic energy accompanied by Kyuubi's presence, and grinned maliciously when seeing Naruto had only his own, limited chakra levels. After what felt like hours, but only a span of 10 seconds at best, Naruto finally managed to stand upright, albeit on unsteady legs, and not a moment too soon. As soon as he was on his feet, Kabuto rose from the ground and slid into a fighting posture while breathing heavily. Out of the corner of Naruto's eye, Tsunade was stirring awake, nearly 13 paces away behind Kabuto. If he didn't act fast, the Odo spy would turn his sights on the slug Sannin, and Naruto knew he wouldn't be able to help her after that. Thankfully, Kabuto hadn't noticed yet. Or he didn't care. Either way, this fight had to come to an end. Flipping their kunes from their thigh holsters, Orochimaru's right-hand man and the Kyuubi vessel dashed toward one another with full intent to kill. In spite of their numerous injuries they sustained after a fight lasting far beyond the limit of their endurance, their pain was forgotten in the throes of battle lust. Their kunes clashed with a high-pitched ting of metal striking metal. All forms of reason flew away. Instinct and hardwired reflexes guided their movements. Slash, duck, kick, evade. Punch, backflip, sprint, slide, kick. These were the only thoughts that raced through both Naruto's mind as well as Kabuto's. The reflexes honed through grueling training ingrained into their minds. For untold minutes the combatants fought like wild hunting beasts. When Naruto attacked, Kabuto evaded and gave ground to avoid the smaller Genin's reach. When Kabuto retaliated, Naruto only fought back harder and countered every punch, kick, and stab by a fraction of a second to escape injury. The cloud of dust and dirt kicked up around the two combatants from their constantly shuffling feet, obscuring them from sight as their melee became increasingly deadly. It escalated into what could only be described as a whirlwind of motion, both fighting to their last breath and yet unable to land a punishing blow. How long they exchanged attacks, neither knew nor did they care. Kabuto took the initiative to end the fight. Slapping Naruto's hands out wide, the silver-haired Otonin dashed inside Naruto's guard and jabbed a sharp punch to the blonde's cheek and drove a downward kick into the dazed Uzumaki's leg at the kneecap. Naruto's leg buckled like a broken twig under his weight. He fell back onto his side unbalanced and took a hard kick to the chest, which threw him just shy of 5 paces away from the now conscious Tsunade, face up and staring at her with unfocused glassy eyes. The blonde, hazel-eyed woman was shouting something to him, her expression grief-stricken and scared, yet despite seeing her lips move, he heard no words. He heard or felt rather the scuffle of approaching footsteps, but it sounded so far away. Merciless hands, that which have taken lives and showed boundless cruelty under the liege of their master, gripped Naruto's wrists like a steel trap, hauling him up off the ground until his feet were no longer touching the earth, held aloft like a broken string puppet. Dazedly he gazed into the face of Kabuto's, his sneer reminding the blonde Genin much of his split persona, Doki. Kabuto regarded Naruto's unfocused expression with disgust, still holding the dazed boy out at arm's length. "Pathetic little insect," he said with a voice filled with malice, "in what world did you think you could fight and defeat me? What was it did you think to accomplish by yourself?" When Naruto didn't answer, the Odo spy continued, "You should have left your demon to kill me. But like an idiot with too much pride, you thought to defeat me yourself. It's no wonder you're such a fool, your pride gets the better of you, blinding you to what you should be doing, instead of trying to save face." After a moment, Naruto finally registered the words Kabuto had spoken, and he offered a defiant bloody smirk. His voice was weak from the slowly diminishing effects of his spent adrenaline. "Pride had nothing to do with it, shitwits. I only stopped the Kyuubi so I could keep my body. Any longer and that furball would have made my body his." He leveled his gaze straight into Kabuto's eyes. "And another thing. Don't preach about pride blinding me when you've left yourself open." Before Kabuto could do more than widen his eyes in surprise, Naruto heaved his legs up against his chest and drove his heels into a hard kick in Kabuto's throat, crushing the windpipe like a hollow straw from the kinetic force. The blow would have killed a normal man, but Kabuto's blood limit would likely repair the damage. The grip around Naruto's wrists vanished as Kabuto clutched desperately at his throat while breathing in hacking gurgle, and the Kyuubi vessel wasted no time in putting in one more uppercut punch into Kabuto's jaw that threw the Otonin's head back, knocking him back in a stumble. His hit flew off his forehead from the punch and clattered a dagger toss away behind him, forgotten. In spite of his crippling injuries Naruto gave him, Kabuto still had enough strength to lash out with a hammer fist blow to the blonde Genin's forehead and send the orange-clad Uzumaki back skidding on his side into Tsunade's waiting arms. The Odo spy wheezed desperately, one hand fishing inside his rear pouch and plucking a tiny dark pill from it, eagerly chewing it up. He'd taken another high Oregon pill to replenish his chakra. Already his dark bruised throat was healing, lightening until no speck of a bruise remained. Tsunade clutched at Naruto desperately. So much blood saturated his clothes, she felt faint at merely touching them. How he had managed to injure Kabuto as he did with his leg broken was nothing short of monumental. Yet he was still trying to get up on his feet when he should have long ago fell unconscious from the numerous amount of injuries he'd sustained in a battle that lasted longer than a whole hour. Naruto shrugged Tsunade's hands away as he finally got the strength to stand. The slug Sennin's hands were shaking too badly to grab a handhold and keep him still. Tsunade stared pleadingly at Naruto's back as he rose to face Kabuto once more, his left leg shaking terribly from the strain of supporting his weight. A memory came unbidden from her past that overlapped with Naruto's image, her long-dead brother, her first lover, the bet she made to give Naruto her grandfather's necklace if he mastered the Rasengan in a week, the pledge she heard him make to become Hokage and earn the respect of his village. Tears poured unfailingly from her eyes as Naruto crossed his forefingers and gritted Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Under his breath, conjuring a shadow clone to his left side in a swirl of smoke. "Please stop, Naruto," she pleaded in a cracked voice. "Enough. Stop fighting. You'll only get yourself killed. What about your dream to become Hokage? Please, for my sake, run away." Kabuto sneered dangerously as he flipped his kunai in his hand. Without another moment's hesitation, he surged forward with his kunai raised to kill. Naruto suddenly spoke a tone of utmost confidence. "Be ready to hand over that bad luck charm necklace of yours, Aba-chan. Cause I'm about to show you the result of my week-long training." Kabuto was now in a mad sprint, closing the distance rapidly with every step. 20 feet. "Please, run away." Naruto smiled softly, somehow conveying his expression to Tsunade even with his back to her. "I won't run away and leave you." Kabuto closed the distance between them within a 5 count, skidding to a stop an arm's length away. With a vicious thrust, he stabbed his kunai toward Naruto's face. There was a splatter of blood as the kunai pierced straight through Naruto's hand, the blade sliding clean past the hilt until Naruto's fingers closed around Kabuto's fist, holding his bloody kunai knife. "I won't die. Until I become Hokage, I refuse to let death itself claim me." His eyes flashed dangerously as his grip tightened into a steep trap. "And now you can't escape." Suddenly, the Kage Bunshin began weaving its hands around Naruto's outstretched free hand as the original body discharged the chakra from his palm, making the chakra spin, while the doppelganger molded and compressed the energy tighter and tighter into a sphere of swirling, twisting blue and white chakra until it formed a fist-sized azure sphere, pulsing with pent-up power. The Kage Bunshin dispersed into smoke on the technique's completion. Channel the chakra. Spin it. Compress the energy. This thought raced repeatedly through the blonde genin's mind as he brought forth everything he'd drilled inside his head from Jireya's lessons and over a week's worth of practice. "What is this?" Sensing the danger of the Kyuubi vessel's chakra sphere, Kabuto tried to wrestle his hand free from Naruto's grip, but the genin's hand held him in a powerful vice. He could not escape in time to evade the blonde shinobi's newest technique. He could only manage a last-ditch effort to clutch Naruto's orange jacket around his chest before the blonde shinobi thrusted the spiral sphere into Kabuto's belly. "Take this, bastard." He bellowed, slamming the chakra sphere into Kabuto's midsection with an explosion of blue and white radiance. The blast from the globe of compressed chakra made the air itself ripple from the point of impact as the compressed air pressure created a shockwave like an expanding ring. The concussive ripple of air pressure, however, failed to mask Naruto's bellowing cry of his newly mastered ninjutsu. Rasengan. The spiral sphere literally tore and twisted into Kabuto's belly, ripping apart the cloth of his shirt as a spiraling vortex of blue and white energy expanded into what looked like a contracting spiral vortex. The spinning force behind the attack blasted Kabuto back as the Rasengan jettisoned the Odo spy and dragged him back a dagger-toss distance before he crashed into a large boulder 10 yards away with an earth-quaking rumble that shook through the ground and air. The force shattering the mound of stone into broken chunks and utterly breaking apart the large section Kabuto crashed into with the expanded sphere of chakra, forming a rough-hewn depression before the compressed energy dispersed and bursted like bubble of thick gas. A trench of crushed and broken earth trailed from Naruto's standing point all the way to the boulder itself. Tsunade stared wide-eyed at the back of the gasping genin, hardly believing someone so young had accomplished mastering a technique as powerful and advanced as the Rasengan. Sure, the means of which he created the technique were unorthodox, but still the ruined pile of rubble and debris bespoke the devastating power Uzumaki just unleashed. A rocky clatter alerted Naruto and Tsunade. The rubble which held Kabuto confined was shoved aside as, battered, bloody, and all around mangled, Kabuto emerged from the ruined remains of the giant boulder. His exposed belly and his torn, tattered shirt was bright bloody red with the flesh disfigured and twisted, a clear sign his organs had suffered the worst of the Rasengan's devastating effects. His breath came in rugged gasps as he leaned on one arm to steady himself against the ruined rock. For lack of a better term, Kabuto looked no better than if he had been chewed up and spat out. Naruto suddenly stiffened before he gagged and vomited a mass of blood from his mouth. It was only reflex that he forced to draw air into his weakening lungs before his legs buckled and his back hit the rocky soil. But by the time he became aware of the pain in his chest, his consciousness was dimming. Despite the gruesome quantities of blood accumulated around Naruto's body, Tsunade rushed to his side and tried to diagnose his symptoms. The spiky blonde-haired genin's breathing was ragged and shallow, and his face was paling from the blood loss he suffered. She turned her sights on the smirking Kabuto. "What did you do to him? How can you still?" Kabuto's grin was colder than ice. The bloody area around his exposed stomach began to hiss with steam rising off of the wound as the blood slowly receded back into Kabuto's body, healing it until only his pale, unmarred skin was visible. "Just before Naruto-kun's attack blasted its full force into my stomach, I transferred all my available chakra to my belly to heal the damage just as it occurred. My Inushimetsu no Jutsu was already healing the damage inflicted." Of course he didn't divulge this technique required nearly all available chakra supply to utilize. "This is the reason Orochimaru-sama values me. Not simply for my skills or killing instincts, but my Jinkekike to heal any manner of wound." Just like Naruto, Kabuto gagged as a rush of blood was spat out his mouth, his eyes wide with confusion. Slowly, his legs bent, buckling until he collapsed face-first into the ground. "Damn it. There's too much damage. Not enough chakra to heal it all." Curious still as to how much damage the Rasengan did to his organs, his left hand was drifting to his rear pouch and plucked out another high organ pellet, eagerly chewing it to replenish his dwindling reserves of energy. It did him no good. The Rasengan not only destroyed most of his organs, but his chakra coils around his stomach, where the energy from processed food was circulated into the body, were also ruined. He couldn't utilize any more chakra until his Karekike fixed itself. Seeing as how his body wasn't responding to his commands very well, Kabuto could turn his head and neck. One eye dropping closed, the Odo spy watched as Tsunade pressed her green chakra-haloed palms against Naruto's convulsing chest, tremors racking through his body as the slug Sannin tried desperately to heal the damage from Kabuto's final attack. Her large breasts heaved with every harsh breath she took, battling against her own fear of blood that covered much of Naruto's exposed body and clothes with a sickened grimace. Kabuto grinned. The instant before the Rasengan struck him, he gripped Naruto's chest and used his chakra Injinto to sever the blonde genin's chakra coils around his heart. Not even Kyuubi could help him now. "You're wasting your efforts," Kabuto rasped breathlessly, with his heart's Karakike cut. "Little Naruto-kun cannot draw the Kyuubi's chakra and heal them. It'll only be another minute before the brat's heart stops beating and he dies." "Shut up." Tsunade hissed acidly. "As soon as I'm done with him, I'll kill you myself." Kabuto fell silent, but his eyes spoke volumes. He was sure the demon brat would die. Throughout the medic nin's exchange, Naruto drifted in and out of consciousness only through sheer force of willpower. Pain racked and flared through every pore and nerve across his body. It was a feat in of itself he hadn't succumbed to it and fell unconscious so long before he hit the ground. He gazed up at Tsunade's distraught expression through unfocused eyes, briefly wondering what happened to the loud, boisterous woman whom sent him crashing through a food cart just a week ago with one flick of her finger. His chest was feeling colder and colder with every thump of his heartbeat. He gasped, forcing his lungs to draw more air to his rapidly weakening body. "I wonder what's going through Kyuubi's head right now, knowing he and I are going to die together." The thought brought a bloody smile to his lips. The detachment he felt from his body was almost surreal. He couldn't even feel Tsunade's hands on his chest, nor the warm energy she pushed into his flesh, desperately trying to repair his severed chakra coils. No doubt the demon fox was frantic with fear, pleading to stay alive. All the pain from his multitude of wounds and injuries began to ebb away as the edges of his vision gradually grew darker, until the blackness swallowed him. There was a strange peaceful sensation in the nothingness Naruto floated in, perpetual and yet calming like a dreamless sleep. Perhaps this was what death truly was. Just a dreamless sleep. A glimmer of green light flared above him from the darkness like a lone star in the night sky, drawing his sight to it like a moth to the flame. Hesitantly, Naruto reached up with his left hand, still bearing the puncture wound from Kabuto's kunai, and grasped the glimmering jade light. Warmth began to flood his chest as globes of white light grew exponentially brighter, flaring like the brightest sunrise, until the darkness that pervaded his vision all but vanished, replaced with white light that gradually dimmed until his visual clarity returned, allowing him to see shapes, colors, and dimensions. The sight that met his eyes was the pale blonde Tsunade staring down at him from above, her hazel brown eyes wide with relief, and her lavender-touched lips drawn in a relieved smile. Naruto peered down at his clenched left fist and opened it, revealing the green jewel of Tsunade's necklace. Some of the blood from the puncture wound smeared the jewel, but it still shined with radiance. Naruto turned his sight back to Tsunade and smiled in triumph, albeit a weak one on account of his exhaustion. "Guess I win the bet, huh?" The slug Sannin could only nod, still smiling. She'd finally given the necklace to the young shinobi, and he hadn't met with the same misfortune as her younger brother or her first lover. The feeling of relief washed over her shoulders, leaving a calm, soothing sensation of quiet peace. To be continued, becoming a true shinobi. Atop one of the many sheer rock formations on the rocky outskirts of Tenzaku town, Jiraiya and Orochimaru stood opposite to one another, pausing in their melee to observe what had happened to cause the sudden explosion of chakra levels and blast discharges. Their sights were inevitably drawn to where Naruto, Tsunade, Shizune, and Kabuto were stopped nearly 3/4 of a mile away. Kabuto was lying face down amidst the debris of a shattered boulder where a trench of paved crushed earth trailed toward Naruto, where Tsunade was hovering above him while he was on his back, apparently injured. Orochimaru hissed furiously at the spectacle of Tsunade beside the Kyuubi brat. How could such a worthless genin actually defeat Kabuto? His strength and skills could rival Hada Kakashi's power, and yet there he was amidst the rubble and debris of the boulder the Kyuubi vessel blasted him into with the unmistakable technique created by the Yondaime. The Rasengan. He narrowed his yellow-slitted eyes toward the ground pair. Goddamn brat. You'll pay for striking my henchman. As for Jiraiya, he offered a little grin of pride at his newest student's show of strength. A part of him could hardly fathom how the brat had mastered executed would be the proper term, he reminded himself the Rasengan with so little time practicing. Seems Tsunade lost that wager she made with the blonde demon vessel. He couldn't help but chuckle. Some things never change. She's still terrible at gambling. Don't worry about Tsunade and the brat, Jiraiya said to Orochimaru, whom was still looking toward Naruto and Tsunade's position. The brat'll be fine after Tsunade patches him up. You and I have a fight to finish. Orochimaru ignored Jiraiya completely. His sole focus of attention was centered on the Kyuubi vessel. That brat's obviously more than he appears if he could master such a powerful technique. And it was no coincidence about that demonic chakra earlier. His connection with the demon is giving more and more power. His brow furrowed in anger. I should have just killed him back in the forest of death. And if the Akatsuki get their hands on him, my life is assuredly forfeit. Gauging the distance carefully, the snake Sannin edged his feet into position for a jump. A glance back to Jiraiya confirmed he was unaware of his intent. The time to kill the brat is. Jiraiya's gaze flickered to Naruto and Tsunade. His eyes widened when he understood the snake Sannin's intent. Now. On that thought, Orochimaru blasted into a flying leap toward his target, covering the distance of over 30 paces in a second with his jump and leaving him airborne, sailing through the air. Jiraiya cursed and hurriedly followed close behind with a jump just as great as the snake Sannin's. Orochimaru's long flexible tongue shot out his mouth and snapped taut around Jiraiya's ankle before the Gamma Sannin could twist aside. A giant heave of strength and Jiraiya was whipped into an arched swing that sent him crashing into the hard ground nearly 2 feet deep from the impact. Only his arms and legs rested limply above his prone body on the flat ground, his main body embedded into the hard-packed rocky soil. With a quick yank, Orochimaru used his tongue to pull and swing himself through midair and rocketed toward Tsunade and Naruto as a serpent emerged from his throat and out his gaping mouth, which the blade of his katana Kusanagi extended from the snake's gullet in split second after. With his arms still nothing more than withered husks, he kept the katana hilt in his mouth. He leveled the sword tip and aimed it at the buxom medic Nin, aiming to kill her first and keep her from aiding anyone else on the field. Tsunade's eyes widened in shock at Orochimaru's sudden appearance, but knew she could not evade the blade thrust while on her hands and knees. She was surely dead. She didn't notice a hand landing on her heavy breast until she felt someone shoved her onto her back and away from the path of the weapon's thrust. Too stunned to move as the hovering tip of Kusanagi stopped and quivered 2 feet above her face, she lied still as the shock was slowly releasing its grip on her limbs. A second closer glance at the sword tip, a bloody blade tip, drew her gaze to her front. The sight that met her eyes froze her heart. Katana point stabbed through his chest, Naruto coughed a glob of blood from his throat, splattering at his feet. His posture was slack, his limbs limp and quivering, yet still he stood with Orochimaru's Kusanagi embedded through his chest and protruding out his back, while one hand clutched feebly on the sword's sharp edge. He must have shoved her aside at the last moment to save her from Orochimaru's poison-coated blade. How can he still be alive? Similar thoughts raced through the snake Sannin's mind, but Orochimaru shoved them aside as he savagely withdrew his sword from the Kyuubi vessel's chest in a flourish, whipping the blood off the blade with a shake of his head. Scarlet pumped from the open wound, staining and saturating into Naruto's orange jacket in a blossom of red around his chest. The blonde Jinchuriki fell to his knees, weakly gripping at the puncture wound with his wounded left hand as Orochimaru loomed dangerously above the helpless genin. Naruto barely heard the snake Sannin whisper die under his breath before Kusanagi struck him again in a downward slash across his left eye, down his face, past his lips, his chin, then completely down across his chest, cutting open his exposed skin, ending at his right hip. He fell onto his back with a thud, too weak to even moan from the agony of his many wounds. He tried to open his left eye, but it wouldn't respond. The poison coating Orochimaru's blade was already killing the cells around the wound. His mind was moving sluggishly due to the numbing agents of the poison. Just for good measure, Orochimaru gave the Kyuubi vessel a savage kick in the side, lifting him off the ground onto his unsteady feet, where a cross-cut of Kusanagi's blade opened a line across the bridge of his nose and cheeks, the force ending the blonde into a spin, where he landed face down in the hard-packed earth. He didn't even have enough breath to groan. His vision was fading, couldn't even hear Orochimaru's words as he was swallowed into oblivion. "And now you die, Kyuubi brat. I'm sending you to hell." With that final statement, Orochimaru brought the blade down in a vertical slash toward Naruto's exposed back. Tsunade jumped in the blade's path, taking the slash on her back and cutting her flesh, while shielding the blonde Jinchuriki with her body, hoping to protect him. She could have just attacked the snake Sannin while he was distracted with Naruto, but the sight of so much blood was preventing her to think straight. Orochimaru snarled in fury at the slug Sannin. "If you get in my way, I'll kill you with the brat." He then proceeded to hack and cut at Tsunade's unprotected back with abandon, hardly caring whether any of his slashes actually did any mortal injury. An upward slash across her left shoulder shoved the buxom blonde woman off Naruto's body, and the snake Sannin made sure she wouldn't interfere again. He put all his weight behind the diagonal slash across her chest, cutting into her ribs and leaving her near unconscious from the massive wounds. Finished with Tsunade, Orochimaru turned around just in time for Naruto's fist to smash into his face, savagely snapping the snake Sannin's head back and breaking his nose, sending him to stumble past the prone body of the slug Sannin. Orochimaru shook his head, disoriented from the blow, but steadied his feet just as Naruto fell into a defensive stance between the pale Nukenin and Tsunade. How could he still be standing, Orochimaru wondered, with so much of Kusanagi's poison running through his system. Stranger still, Naruto's vacant expression showed he was still partially, at least unconscious, as his eyes were glossy and unfocused, despite his solid stance. As impossible as it seemed, Naruto had actually allowed his instincts to take control of his body, while his mind slowly came back to the surface of his awareness. The answer came to him as he watched the demon vessel's minor wounds begin to close before sealing shut, completely healed, but leaving pale lines that contrasted with his tanned, weathered skin. The Kyuubi was still channeling his chakra into the brat, healing all his injuries. Despite that, however, only the wounds caused by Kabuto were healing, while the wounds from Kusanagi were not. All the poison inside his system must have been burned away by the Kyuubi's demonic chakra and cleansing his inner coil system. The poison still prevented the demon fox's chakra from fully regenerating the scored flesh. In the back of Naruto's mind, he could hear the demon fox's sibilant whisper, "Don't think that my giving you chakra means anything other than my own survival. I can't have you die and taking me with you because of your stupidity. That's twice you've died and nearly brought me along with you. And don't forget that I will take your body in due time, but for now I'll settle with surviving this day. Now finish that serpent bitch already. I grow tired of his presence regardless of his absolute loathing of the demon." Naruto was more than happy to comply, glaring at the snake Sannin with his one eye as his mental clarity returned. Despite his strength rapidly rejuvenating, Naruto was still no match for Orochimaru in either skill, strength, speed, or experience, and both knew it too. The pale Nukenin's first move nearly cleaved the Jinchuriki's head off his shoulders had he not ducked Kusanagi's crosscut, and by then Naruto was backpedaling desperately to keep out of the deadly katana's reach as it whistled through the air. Do or die at this point, Naruto thought, knowing he couldn't run forever. I must be insane, but better my sanity than my life. Without an instant of hesitation, knowing how suicidal his next move would prove to be if he made the slightest error, Naruto stopped in his tracks, and Orochimaru capitalized on the chance to kill the demon vessel, bringing his Kusanagi in a downward slash to split the boy in two. There was no escape. Jiraiya regained consciousness just as had Shizune and Naruto's two frog summons, Gamafueashi and Gamakudo. The sight that greeted them upon awakening was something none had expected. Just 15 strides away from their vicinity, Naruto and Orochimaru faced off, the blonde genin grasping Kusanagi's blade with both hands as the snake Sannin struggled to pull his katana free. The blade of Kusanagi cut deeply into Naruto's palms, scarlet running down the blade and dripping into the soil. A strangled groan growled from Naruto's throat, straining his muscles to hold onto Orochimaru's Kusanagi, while the snake Sannin hissed with frustration, having no luck in taking his sword from the demon vessel's grip. Neither broke their level gazes, issuing the most hateful-looking glares that promised the other they wouldn't leave the battlefield without spilling the other's blood. Orochimaru twisted the Kusanagi blade out of Naruto's grip in such a sudden flourish, the blonde's hands were ripped open even further, but Kyuubi's chakra quickly mended the damage, binding the flesh back together and leaving pale scars. Jiraiya was already beginning to weave hand signs, while Shizune armed her needle launcher, just as Gamakudo and Gamafueashi hopped toward the scene to aid Naruto. But no matter how quickly they tried to, they wouldn't get there in time to make a difference. The snake Sannin brought his sword up to slash at the Jinchuriki once more, except Naruto was suddenly inside the arc of Orochimaru's sword swing. "This is for Sarajiji, bastard." Naruto yelled, pulling his arm back and jabbing his fingers viciously into the snake Sannin's left eye. He curled his fingers around his prize and savagely tore it from Orochimaru's eye socket, where he screamed in absolute agony, pulling his kusanagi back into his gullet in futility, clutching at his empty eye socket with his ruined arms, all the while screaming obscenities and wailing in pain. The final uppercut from Naruto snapped Orochimaru's head back and sent the Nukenin stumbling, dazed and confused. I must retreat. Orochimaru thought desperately, pivoting around in a mad spin. I'm injured. I must get away. Where's Kabuto? Upon touring around, however, his face was met with Tsunade's powerful punch. His cheekbone shattered, and his body soared past the surprised Naruto before skidding to a stop several strides away from the no longer prone Kabuto. The gray-haired medic nin realized he and his master were now at a severe disadvantage. Orochimaru-sama. Call Manda. Jiraiya cursed just as Kabuto made a desperate leap toward Orochimaru. The name the Odo spy mentioned could only be the master of the snake summons. Sparing just an instant to gauge how Tsunade and Naruto were faring as his hands were already weaving for a summoning, the blonde Jinchuriki and Shizune were on their feet and otherwise out of harm's way. The busty platinum blonde slug Sannin was already weaving the hand signs for a summoning. The closer inspection on Tsunade, the point on her forehead which held a diamond-shaped crest, was now glowing a bright purple, where thick swirling designs like tattoos curled up her forehead and down between her eyes in the outline of a butterfly, slowly spreading out before stopping. A few seconds later, and her wounds began to sizzle, mend, then close altogether, completely healed. The glance toward Shizune showed that Tsunade's apprentice was not so much as relieved but worried. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes. Either he was mistaken or Tsunade just used a kenjutsu she told him of nearly 10 years ago. The Sazu Saisei no Jutsu. A forbidden technique that would heal any and all her injuries at the cost of shortening her lifespan. She must have been in dire need to use it. He had no time left to dwell on that. Finishing his hand signs and praying Tsunade's poison wouldn't hinder his technique as before, Jiraiya slapped his palm on the ground just as Tsunade and Kabuto did the same, shouting Kuchus no Jutsu. 3 consecutive explosions of smoke and dust boomed, forming a triangular parameter where 3 gigantic beasts emerged from the smoke cover. A giant toad, an enormous slug, and a gigantic snake. Tsunade stood perched on the head of her summoning animal, Katsuayu. A white slug with blue-green stripes running down her back. Beside the slug Sannin, Naruto stood ready. Shizune was down below with the demon vessel's frog summons and, after concentrating his senses, his last 2 cage buncheons. Tsunade turned back to Naruto. When she saw his wound across his eye, she moved to help heal it, but Naruto shoved her hands away. Don't bother. My eye's gone and Kyuubi's chakra already burned away all traces of the poison. He had to sever my blood flow away from the sword wounds to keep me from dying, and these scars won't go away. Just concentrate on the fight. His right eye flicked down towards Shizune and his frog summoned before turning back to Tsunade. I'm going down below. I'll help how I can, but I can't promise anything. And without another word Naruto jumped off Katsuayu's head and down to Shizune and the frog summons. Amabunta puffed at his pipe while speaking in a low, relatively speaking, voice, staring at each summon and their summoners in turn. His voice was like a rumbling landslide. Orochimaru and Manda, Tsunade and Katsuayu, and you and I, together again. Brings back old memories, eh, Jiraiya? Contrary to Gamabunta's nostalgic comment, the Gama Sannin was all business. Stop dwelling down memory lane and get ready to fight. This is where Orochimaru is finally brought to justice. Amabunta was a giant of a toad, easily 200 feet high with brown, warty hide skin. A vertical scar line ran down across his left eye for 20 feet and swirling brushstroke tattoos covered his face like makeup across his back and around his belly. He wore a black hoary half-coat with a kanji in its center at the back and an adachi at his hip which was fastened by thick lengths of gauze around his waist. He smoked from a bowl pipe clamped in his jaws and puffed out clouds of smoke while atop his head, Jiraiya prepared his ninjutsus. Orochimaru, Manda said with a vicious hissing growl. How dare you summon me for your petty fights? Do you want me to kill you? Easily the largest of the 3 summons, Manda was twice as large and heavy as the last 2 snake summons, bearing a flat wedge-shaped head with 4 back-pointing horns with a huge mouth large enough to swallow Gamabunta whole, and his purple-scaled, black-banded body was easily over 1,000 feet long and 70 feet thick. His eyes were bright yellow, with vertical slit pupils, as long as a man was tall. His serpentine body coiled beneath him, ready for the attack. Before Kabuto could even raise any attempt to plead to the giant snake summon, Orochimaru beat him to it. Shut your ungrateful mouth, insect. You are my servant and will do as I bid. Do otherwise and I'll slice your head off with my kusanagi. Now I order you to kill these wretches. Kabuto nearly quailed with fear, knowing the consequences of what would happen if Manda discovered his summoner was not only unable to use ninjutsu, but also without an eye and severely winded at present. Insulting a giant volatile serpent while so wounded was the equivalent of suicide. But thankfully, Manda couldn't tell from his vantage point, and the murderous tone of voice Orochimaru spoke with was more than enough to unsettle the beast. The giant purple snake grumbled under his breath about having 100 sacrifice meals afterward and showed no further protests. While Katsuayu stayed motionless and quiet, Gamabunta threw the proverbial fuel on the bonfire by puffing a streaming cloud of smoke into Manda's face. The giant serpent's eyes flashed dangerously. "Yowie, think I'll have some toad for dinner tonight? Be honored, you'll soon fill my belly." Gamabunta was undaunted, pulling out his Nadachi blade free from its wooden sheath in his webbed hand. "I've always wanted a snakeskin wallet." Jiraiya leveled his glare toward his ex-teammate. "We're no longer comrades, Orochimaru. Today you die." "Comrades?" The snake Sannin laughed. A cruel cackle. "Born a fool, lived a fool, and so you'll die the fool. We are the three Sannin no more." Tsunade roared with a booming voice. She was done with words, all that was left was to fight. Following her declaration was a pensive silence that seemed to last longer than it actually was. Katsuayu attacked first, spitting a green acidic slime from her mouth toward Manda, but the giant snake summon easily slithered out of its path and the slime splattered onto a stray boulder, melting it like heated candle wax. Manda pressed his advantage by quickly moving behind the giant slug and wrapping his body completely around Katsuayu's squishy form in a constricting squeeze, opening his fanged mouth completely to swallow the slug's summon whole. Gamabunta interceded Manda's attempt by chopping his Nadachi into the serpent's mouth, but the giant purple snake snapped his jaws shut on the blade in a tight clamp before it could cut him. Despite all the boss of the Toad Summon's efforts, he couldn't free his weapon. But then Katsuayu did something neither summon expected. Like her body was breaking apart into smaller pieces, Katsuyu's one huge body suddenly became hundreds of smaller slugs, each the size of a man that slipped out of Manda's coiled grip as easily as sand through a man's fingers. However, having left Manda's grip, the snake summon's body became unburdened and used his tail to lash at Gamabunta from above. The Toad Summon had to abandon his Nadachi and backflip to evade the tail from smashing him into the ground. The crash of Manda's tail sundered the rocky earth and sent up a shower of rock and debris, quaking the earth along with Gamabunta's thunderous landing. The landscape was quickly turning into a field of rubble. Manda whipped his head around and, taking aim, launched Gamabunta's Nadachi back at him like a spear. Had Gamabunta not jumped sideways to evade the flying blade, he would have been impaled and his weapon embedded into the rocky ground on impact before once again landing on his feet just as Katsuayu's mass of smaller doppelgangers began to come together and merge back into one huge body. Jiraiya cursed, kneeling atop Gamabunta's head to keep himself from losing his footing. Everywhere he looked was chaos. Choking clouds of dust and sand, a rainfall of rock and earth debris, the chunks of earth uprooted by the combat of the fierce fighting beast. Add it all together, and he knew even after an unsuccessful scan that finding either the whereabouts or condition of Naruto, Shizune, or the smaller frog summons was all but impossible. But he couldn't stray his attention away from the fight for any longer than he had already. He had to fight. "Boss. Gimme some oil." Jiraiya yelled over the deafening sounds around them, his hands weaving signs frantically. Gamabunta grunted an affirmative, puffed his rubbery cheeks, and spat out a streaming jet of black-brown oil toward Manda, followed by Jiraiya's shout Kaiten. "Gameu Enden." As he spewed out a stream of fire from his mouth, igniting the giant toad's oil as it shot toward the purple snake. Like a giant firestorm easily large enough to engulf an entire village, the cloud of flames swirled, crackled, burned everything around it. The shadow of Manda's body, just a silhouette inside the raging storm of fire, melted and charred, filling the air with scent of burning flesh. Except Jiraiya's trained eyes saw through the illusion. It wasn't Manda burning inside the blazing inferno, it was his shedded skin. Scaly bastard must have substituted himself with his molted skin before the blaze struck. Suddenly from underground, an uplifting fissure snaked toward Gamabunta and exploded outward in a shrapnel of stone. By reflex, Gamabunta managed to catch what had been sent to attack him, only to find it was the tip of Manda's tail. The boss toad turned around just in time to see the same serpent's head thrust from the earth and opened his fanged jaws impossibly gaping wide, ready to devour Gamabunta whole, with his long fangs gleaming like polished swords. The kunai shot from out of the dust cloud, piercing into Manda's yellow eye before it exploded into a spray of yolk-like gore, stopping the serpent from lunging at Gamabunta and instead screeched with agony, tossing his horned head around by the pain of his new injury. The kunai must have had an explosive tag tied to it. A second later, Gamakuto shot out from the dust cloud on the opposite side of Manda head, legs outstretched from his powerful leap, and slashed out the giant serpent's left remaining eye with his sword in a quick cross-cut, effectively blinding the snake summon as the eye fluid spilled from the ruptured membrane like a gel capsule. Hardly believing his luck, Jiraiya turned to where the kunai came from and sighted Naruto beside Shizune with Gamafueashi perched on the orange-clad Genin's shoulder with his sword drawn. Never thought I'd feel happy to have that brat with me at a time like this. I owe you one, brat. A flicker of movement at the peripheral edge of his vision drew his attention upward, and suddenly Gamabunta's Nadachi dropped from the sky and impaled the giant serpent boss summoned through his head, pinning him to the earth. The blade sank completely to the hilt through the skull and rock, killing the serpent instantly. Perched atop the hilt of Gamabunta's Nadachi was Tsunade herself, having been the one who must have used her chakra-augmented strength to throw the giant weapon. Manda's lifeless body twitched in nervous spasms and jerky movements. Neither Jiraiya or Tsunade had time to praise their sudden advantage when Orochimaru, still perched atop Manda's head, shot his whip-like tongue out from his gullet, extending over 30 feet, and snapped tight around the busty slug Sannin's throat in an attempt to strangle her. But before he could get any leverage on her, Tsunade took the snake Sannin's tongue and, like a fisherman reeling in his prize, yanked Orochimaru straight off his feet and into the air directly toward Tsunade's fist. The cracking strike of Tsunade's punch broke the Nukinen's jaw and he hurriedly disengaged his tongue from Tsunade's throat before retreating back from Manda's lifeless body. Waiting on the ground was Kabuto, still kneeling as his severely weakened body had no more strength to support itself. Orochimaru hopped unsteadily toward his servant, still adjusting to his balance, since his one eye had to overcompensate and, in effect, removing his depth perception. It wasn't until he landed on his feet beside the gray-haired medic Nin that he turned around to face Tsunade and Jiraiya one last time. The sight that greeted them gave both Sannin's pause. The skin around his face, particularly around the empty eye socket where his left eye had been ripped out, was flaked away, revealing smoother skin beneath it, as though he were wearing a mask. His left cheek was swollen and discolored from having been shattered by Tsunade's punch, his nose crooked by Naruto's blow, and his jaw drooped at one side, also broken by Tsunade's most recent punch. Despite the obvious beating he had taken for the past 10 minutes, the only signs of fatigue he showed was his heavy breathing. His right eye, his last one, still bared a sharp look like the eye of a sadistic demon. Out of the blue, Orochimaru started laughing. "This isn't the last you'll see of me, I promise you. I will exact my revenge and crush Konoha to dust. I will slaughter everyone in your pathetic village." He turned his one eye toward the slug Sannin. "And Tsunade. Don't think you were my only option to restore my arms. I will regain all my strength, and when I do, I swear you will be the last to die to witness everything you've ever fought, killed, and lived for be removed from this world before your eyes. Then I'll have the personal satisfaction of killing you myself." While Tsunade puzzled over the spectacle of Orochimaru's mask, Jiraiya understood clearly that his ex-comrade had succeeded in developing his body switch ninjutsu. "I knew something didn't feel right when I fought him before. He must have switched his soul into another body before he left Konoha." Nearly 20 yards behind Tsunade and Jiraiya, Naruto barely heard the snake Sannin spout on about his vengeful plans. Although his injuries were all healed, his adrenaline was slowing to a stop just as exhaustion was finally setting in on him. His legs buckled beneath him, knees scraping the hard dirt as his breathing grew heavier and sweat began pumping from his skin. The glance to his right revealed Shizune was in a similar state of exhaustion, barely managing to stand upright. Their fatigue was finally catching up to them. "I gotta attack while the snake bastard is distracted," Naruto thought, frantically rummaging through his weapon pouches to find a kunai. He had none left. Damn it. I'll be damned if both Kabuto and Orochimaru escape. Where's another kunai? A glimmer of reflected light sparkled in the corner of his eye, drawing his attention. The same kunai with the fake explosive tag he'd used against Kabuto earlier had been kicked up during the two Serpent Summon's first attack with the debris. Only 15 feet away. He glanced back at the group, trying to determine when to go into motion. In what must have been only a minute that seemed to last hours, Orochimaru and Kabuto were just about to retreat. The demon vessel knew his chance now. With an explosive burst of speed, Naruto sprinted after his fallen kunai, dived into a roll while simultaneously closing his fingers around his prize. He rode the momentum of his leap onto his feet, turned, and drew his arm back for a throw. Unconsciously, he channeled his chakra energy through his hand into the throwing knife as he would with a Rasengan, and spun the energy inside the kunai just as he launched the knife toward its mark with all his available strength. The kunai flew like a crossbow bolt. Sailing past the surprised faces of Tsunade and Jiraiya, the kunai shot toward the two Nukinens. When Kabuto realized the kunai was targeting him, he twisted aside, a second too late. His head snapped back as the kunai pierced into his forehead, embedding through the skull and into brain, killing him instantly. He fell backward with a dull thump onto his back. The cloud of chakra he'd been emitting that would teleport him to safety all but dispersed into nothingness, clinging to him and leaving a smoky trail of his backward descent. No one moved. For the longest time, stuck as if in a standstill, the three great Sannin stared at the unmoving body of Kabuto. Then Orochimaru leveled the malevolent glare Naruto had ever seen at him, a single expression that revealed every ounce of his fury. "How dare you," he hissed menacingly, narrowing his one eye in rage. "You'll pay for that, demon brat. I think I'll kill you first once I regain my arms. The ground under Orochimaru's feet suddenly uplifted, cracking, and he began to slowly sink into the earth like quicksand. But for today, I must retreat and heal my wounds you gave me. But don't get comfortable, I'll personally see to killing you myself as slowly and painfully as possible. If anything, Orochimaru's threat only amused Naruto. His mouth broke out into a face-splitting grin, but his one eye issued a threat in itself. He held up the eye he took from the snake Sannin, pinching it between his forefingers and thumb. You know what they say, Orochimaru. An eye for an eye. You took my eye, I took yours. You killed Sarujichi, I killed your henchman. A fair trade, isn't it? Of course, the Jinchuriki continued, I still have to pay you back for killing me. That attack you used to attack Abe-chan speared your sword through my heart. I thought for sure I was dead when I felt my heart stop beating, but I guess I'm pretty damn hard to kill completely. He clenched his fist, barely holding back from crushing the yellow, sharp-slitted eye. Don't think this is the last time you'll see me, snake bastard. The next time we meet, I promise you, I'll take everything else from you. I won't even spare your soul. Orochimaru sneered contemptuously, half his body already buried under the ground to make his escape. You make a promise you can't keep. It was Naruto's turn to sneer, pocketing the snake Sannin's eye. I've never made a promise more easily kept. Skulk back into whatever hole you hide yourself in, snake. I'll take your life soon enough. He narrowed his gaze, sharp as a razor, into Orochimaru's eye as his body sank deeper into the earth. And unlike you, I don't threaten, I only promise. But the final rock-grating rumble, Orochimaru was gone. Neither of the two Sannins bothered to follow. Jiraiya had a broken leg and several fractured ribs, along with his chakra acting erratically. And Tsunade was too drained to even stand after all the medic ninjutsu she'd used in one day. She and the Toad Sannin would need time to recover. Naruto walked past them, a slight limp in his step as his exhaustion was sinking into his bones and weary muscles. He stopped at the sprawled, spread-eagle body of Kabuto, the kunai still stuck inside his forehead. The eyes of the dead body stared blankly up at nothing, glassy, unfocused. It felt strange standing there in front of the body of the one that so easily befriended him during the Chunin exams, earning his trust, only to suddenly find him a traitorous spy, working for the most hated man Naruto ever knew and the enemy of his home village. He supposed he should be more angry at himself for falling so easily for Yakushi Kabuto's charade, entrusting him with his life during the second stage of the Chunin exam back in the Forest of Death within the borders of Konoha. But all he felt was a vindictive satisfaction. Despite the guilt he knew he should feel for taking someone's life for the first time as a shinobi, he had to admit to himself, it felt good taking his life by his own hands. A series of thumps from behind announced one the frog summons approaching. Ifue Ashi hopped to his side, holding out his katana by the blade and offering the blonde genin the sword hilt. Naruto hesitated for only a second before grasping the frog summon's weapon hilt. He held it one hand, extended fully to rest the blade tip beside Kabuto's head, gauging the reach with his depth perception removed along with his left eye. He brought the blade up in a two-handed grip over his head and brought it down in cross-cut at Kabuto's neck. If anything, he could get the reward money for Kabuto's bounty. The head flipped away, bouncing atop the rocky soil as blood pumped sluggishly from the stump of the neck. He wiped the blade on Kabuto's black shirt, removing the blood before handing the smaller frog summon back his sword, fished his hand inside his rear pouch, and pulled out his last explosive tag. He ignited the paper slip with a spark of chakra, bringing forth a small flame at the corner of the note before dropping it onto Kabuto's body, drifting down like a leaf. He turned away to retrieve the dead medic nin's head. An explosion blasted behind him, turning the still air into a sudden gale that whipped at his clothes and blood-stained hair, settling into a roar of blazing fire. It lasted only a few seconds, but all that remained of Kabuto's body were ashes. He stopped at Kabuto's head and picked it up, wrenching out the kunai from the skull with a crunch. He glanced at the kunai in his hand, feeling some tiny depressions along the knife handle. Suddenly he remembered this same kunai being what the demon of hidden mist, Zabuza, had used to cut off the head of Gato. Naruto remembered giving the Nukenin the kunai after Gato betrayed him to renegades for profit during Team 7's mission to guard the bridge builder, Tazuna, the target for the Nukenin. The blonde shinobi found it ironic that the same kunai Zabuza used to kill Gato, he himself used to take the life of Kabuto. It was also ironic that, had Kabuto managed to keep his hit I-8, Naruto's kunai might not have penetrated into his skull and killed him. The blonde genin felt the eyes of everyone present on him, watching, waiting. On a sudden impulse, perhaps from the satisfying experience as with Orochimaru, Naruto jammed his forefingers inside the eye socket and ripped out Kabuto's right eye, snapping it off the optical nerves and muscles. He pocketed his new prize with the eye he took from Orochimaru. Maybe he could wear his new trophies on a necklace. An overwhelming sense of exhaustion overcame him, making him drop Kabuto's head unceremoniously to the ground, but offered no resistance as exhaustion made him collapse face first into the hard-packed earth as his vision darkened, sweeping him away into oblivion. The last thing he saw was Jiraiya and Tsunade rushing to him as if far away. Strangely, he could have sworn the voluptuous slug Sannin turned into an old woman with wrinkled features, her expression distraught. Naruto awoke lying in the same bed in the hotel room Jiraiya had ordered before the whole battle began. The sunlight coming in from the window suggested it was early morning, meaning he had been asleep for half a day or more. On his chest was a multicolor spotted cat named Chu, the hotel manager's playful pet that Naruto took a liking to the first day meeting the feline. He scratched Chu behind his ears, earning a purr of approval as it nuzzled his hand. He turned to his left to find Jiraiya and Tsunade sitting in wooden chairs on the left side of his bed, obviously waiting for him to awake. They had evidently changed and cleaned their clothes after the battle, and Naruto checked himself for a quick moment, finding his orange jumpsuit gone. He wore a black long-sleeved shirt and loose brown trousers, and Tsunade's jeweled pendant necklace hanging around his neck. Finding his vision halved, as he remembered Orochimaru's Kusanagi cutting into him all too vividly, Naruto reflexively touched around his left eye, his fingers coming into contact with the rough leather texture of an eye patch. He turned back to the two Sannin beside his bed. "How long was I asleep?" "Nearly a whole day," Jiraiya answered. "Tsunade managed to heal the rest of us after the battle, once we'd gotten back to the hotel." He jerked his thumb toward the door. "Shizune will be back for some extra clothes for you. I trashed your jumpsuit, it was just tatters and ribbons anyway." Naruto nodded absently, scanning across the room before his gaze settled on a ragged gray cloth bag on the table near the corner of the room. He turned back to Jiraiya with a raised eyebrow. "Kabuto's head," the toad Sannin answered bluntly. He dug his hand into his pocket for something and tossed it to the blonde Jinchuriki. A necklace with two sphere-like items on the leather cord. The closer inspection of the two spheres revealed them to be the eyes he took from Orochimaru and Kabuto. He ran his finger over them, finding some kind of plastic film covering them. No doubt some preservation material. He slipped his new necklace over his head, resting above the jeweled green pendant Tsunade had given him. When he turned back to regard the two Sennins, their expressions were suddenly grave and serious. It was Tsunade that spoke first. "I think you better go look in a mirror. And take off the eye patch. A lot had happened while you were asleep. You'll see for yourself." Bread dropped into his gut like a lead weight. Sparing no questions, Naruto shoved off his bed leaving an irritated Chu which yielded in protest to his resting spot and went into the bathroom. He flicked on the light switch and stared at his reflection in the mirror. His visible eye widened in shock. His face a mix of boyish roundness and masculine hardness, his cheeks bared his trademark whisker birthmarks, where 3 parallel horizontal scars lines each cheek. Also, his face bore 2 new scars. A scar line that went from above his left eyebrow and down the span of the left side of his face, past his chin and lips, which fell in line with a scar that went from his collarbone to his right hip. Another scar, much like his former torturer Iruka's, overlapped the vertical scar, going across the bridge of his nose and upper cheeks. His hair was like the brightest flame, vibrant yellow with streaks of orange and red. His right eye was blue, so deep in color like indigo, it practically merged with the black of his pupil. Such were not what attracted his attention. His skin tone, once a light tan brown, was now pale as bone like a corpse's. Only someone lost a considerable amount of body heat could turn as white as his skin. He touched his face still warm, and his confusion grew. Remembering what Tsunade said about the eye patch, Naruto brought his hand up and slowly lifted it away. A sudden feeling of vertigo assaulted his sense of sight, offsetting his visual balance, as though one eye was too powerful for the other to keep up. Waiting for his vision to adjust, all the while wondering how his left eye survived the deadly blade of Orochimaru's Kusanagi, he found his answer. Staring at him from his reflection, 2 eyes of different color met his. His right eye blue, the left eye that should have been ruined, was now primal red with a cat-like pupil. The same eye as from the Kyuubi no Kitsune. He heard Tsunade speaking behind him as if from far away. "Shizune and I tried to find what was causing your skin to pale, but our diagnosis couldn't find anything abnormal. When we were removing your tattered clothes, Shizune inspected the damage done to your eye to see if we might repair with our medic ninjutsu, but instead your eye's just been replaced, I think. The chakra coils connecting to your red eye are directly linked to the seal." Tsunade paused, staring at Naruto's back facing her. "I'm sorry. There's nothing Shizune could do to change what happened to you. We can't alter the chakra coils around your eye without completely taking it out, nor could we do anything about your scars. The poison that coated the Kusanagi sword, it's made your scars permanent. I'm sorry I couldn't do more." The blonde genin was hardly paying heed to any of her consoling words. Naruto knew he should feel upset for the demon fox to force on him this unwanted gift. Tying directly to the seal and to the Kyuubi's chakra, the demon vessel knew his new eye wouldn't revert back to blue and hide the demonic orb. The sight of his new eye would only incite the rage of the villagers from Konoha once he returned. The changes the demon fox had done to him made him feel used, like he was suddenly less than human and just a tool that was just modified for the purposes of a demented demon he lived to hate. Instead, he smiled. I don't care anymore what I look like, Naruto thought to himself, remembering the scorn and hate almost every villager threw his way for reasons beyond his control. Let them think what they like. If they've got a problem with it, I'll kill them myself. I'm done being concerned for the massive trash that litters my home. Hardly caring where this strange pragmatism was coming from, he brought his hand up and touched his new trophies on his necklace. Besides, he thought with a wry grin, as Sannin and Doki told me before, the Kyuubi's chakra is just as much my own. He and I are bound no matter what happens. I may as well use his power. Remembering also of his encounter with Doki, he laughed to himself. That was when he had to choose between two evils. Still, better to be half saved than wholly damned. Without another thought about this strange development, Naruto shoved the matter aside, thinking of dealing with it later. He turned back to more pressing concerns, turning to face Jiraiya. So, Sannin, when do we leave for Konoha? Smothering the temptation to hit the brat over his head for addressing him with that demeaning title, Jiraiya said simply, we'll be leaving in 2 days. I just need to visit some of my informants to gather some more information about this group, Akatsuki. You remember them, I hope. Naruto nodded. Only 10 days ago, 2 S-class missing nin by the names of Hashige Kisame and Itachi Uchiha paid him a surprise visit at their hotel room. Itachi Uchiha, also the older brother of Sasuke Uchiha and the murderer of the Uchiha clan, was in fact the clan prodigy and skilled enough to beat down his younger brother with contemptuous ease, as he had done just after Jiraiya had made his appearance to stop the 2 nuke nins from achieving their primary objective of capturing the Jinchuriki. Unfortunately, both missing nins escaped, leaving Uchiha Sasuke wounded from Itachi's beating and, after Itachi used one of his ninjutsus, leaving Sasuke in a comatose state. Naruto shook his head, trying to shake away the recollection and the unpleasant feelings of rage that accompanied the memory. Now wasn't the time to dwell on something that couldn't be helped. He looked back to Jiraiya. Say, Iro-sen Jiraiya-sama, would you be willing to teach me something? The toad Sannin instantly became suspicious upon hearing the endearing addressment the spiky blonde shinobi used. What exactly? Naruto grinned, setting back his eye patch over his left eye. Amazingly, he saw through his right eye well enough as with both eyes. What can you teach me about seals? 2 days later, the troop was already on trek toward the village of Konoha, the sun beating down pleasantly warm rays of light onto their backs. Jiraiya, Tsunade, Shizune, Naruto and Taunton, the medic nin's pet pig, strode through a trail flanked on both sides by wide expanses of forest with evergreen trees. The air was alive with a cacophony of bird calls and buzzing insects. Tsunade and Jiraiya took the front lead, conversing quietly about their past and what they'd both been doing since they went their separate ways over a decade ago. As per her agreement, Tsunade accepted enrolling as the new Hokage for Konoha, saying she owed Naruto that much if not more, she implied for saving her life several times during the battle and for granting her the chance to move on and make something of her life. Naruto and Shizune followed behind them, about 5 yards, to give the 2 Sannin their privacy. Taunton snorted, shuffling his cloven-hoofed feet to match the shinobi's longer strides. As his jumpsuit was no longer wearable, Naruto wore a different ensemble. A fishnet shirt covered his top underneath a boiled leather armor breastplate, where a grey long-sleeved vest went over the cuirass. Since his pants hadn't been ruined during the fight, Naruto's once bright orange trousers were now a dull, burnt orange. Jiraiya had even taken the liberty of restocking all his weapon gear by purchasing more ningu back in Tenzaku town. Instead of bothering with an eye patch, Naruto elected just to use his Hit I-8 headband to cover his left eye, much like his current team leader, Hada Kakashi. 3 hours into their walk however, all 4 ninjas sensed the presence of another shinobi around the area. Instantly all were on high alert, snapping out their preferred weapons or settling with bare fists and readying hand seals for ninjutsu. Their assailants leapt from the trees in a blur of motion, landing on their feet with perfect measured balance, kicking up only a minute amount of dust where their feet touched the ground. The group suddenly found themselves facing 2 of the worst opponents conceivable. Both men that stood side by side wore ink black cloaks with scarlet red clouds, bamboo hats with bells dangling from the rims atop their heads, almost completely concealing their features. Naruto recognized them from their last encounter. The shorter of the 2, easily as tall as Shizune, was Uchiha Itachi. The clan prodigy of the Uchiha family as well as the one who carried out the clan's genocide, the Nukenin was slim of frame, but unmistakably more deadly than his appearance led to believe. His face was the epitome of handsome perfection, with jet black hair near shoulder length, and 2 diagonal scar lines ran down from both sides of his nose down to the corners of his mouth. He wore his Konoha Hit I-8 on his forehead with a horizontal score etched across the leaf symbol. Glowing red eyes that held 3 floating tomo in the red iris in a triangular formation flared like hot coals from under the hood of his bamboo hat. The Kekigenkai of the Uchiha clan, able to copy ninjutsu, see through illusions, and even ensnare the mind and soul itself through simple eye contact, the Sharingan. The taller of the two was even larger than Jiraiya. Hashige Kisame was like nothing Naruto had ever seen before. While his features were more or less human in a sense, his skin tone was a light bluish gray, with slits under his shark-like eyes, each on his cheeks like fish gills. Always having a hungry smirk on his face, Naruto saw his teeth were sharp, pointed, and serrated, as though he was once a shark that transformed into a man. His dark blue hair stood straight up in ragged spikes, complemented with his Kurigaku headband, with a score line slashed across the wave symbols like Itachi's. Broad-shouldered and immensely muscular, Itachi's head barely came up to the Kirinin's shoulder. Strapped to his back with a thick leather harness was a giant sword bound and wrapped in binding gauzes with a foot-long handle, which carried the power to absorb chakra with ease. The sword Naruto remembered Kisame calling it Samehada. Itachi took a step forward, then stopped, staring directly at Naruto. Don't bother trying to run away. You know why we have come, so it's pointless to fight or flee. Give yourself over to us and the rest of you will be spared. Now, why in the world would I do that for a prick like you, Itachi? Naruto asked with a smirk. If you want to capture me, why not just make an actual effort instead of trying to coerce me with intimidation? Cause if that's your plan, I'm frankly unimpressed. Kisame grinned, revealing his shark-like teeth. Like I said before, this kid's interesting. He's got guts. His smirk turned into a predatory grin. Which I'll enjoy ripping out of his belly. No sooner had the Kirinin finished speaking did Itachi employ his Sharingan's power, ensnaring all whom looked in his eyes within a powerful illusion of the mind. His most powerful technique used the power foe the stronger level of the Sharingan, the Magenkyo Sharingan. The tomo in his red eyes merged together, forming a 3-point wheel like a spinning fan. The scenery changed around the entire party as the sky turned pitch black and surroundings dulled into total gray. Kisame was absent as the Kirinin hadn't been subjected to Itachi's genjutsu and thus wasn't pulled into the illusionary dimension of the mind. The 4 shinobi Naruto, Jiraiya, Tsunade and Shizune all appeared as nothing more than 2-dimensional images, each seeming less than substantial. They appeared as flat as paper. At their feet, a ball of flame engulfed them, slowing rising up and turning their paper bodies to ashes. Despite the mental backlash that should follow the illusion, none the Konoha shinobi showed any signs of discomfort. Their expressions ranged from surprise to curious, but showed no fear or pain. It wasn't until Itachi concentrated his Sharingan to his limits that he perceived the truth. The group trapped in his genjutsu were only cage buncheons. By the time he understood what happened, it was already too late for Itachi to prepare a warn Kisame. From the tree cover of the forest flanking the worn path, Tsunade leapt out onto the pair with a fist raised, crashing it down into the ground which the Nukenin duo had barely evaded, kicking back on their heels as the slug Sennin's fist missed them by inches. The ground beneath their feet shattered from the impact of Tsunade's punch, turning the solid ground beneath them into a depressing death trap of rubble. They jumped out of the rubble pit and onto level ground just as Shizune popped out of the bushes and snapped her needle slinger at the pair with poison needles and senbon, forcing them to separate and evade the medic nin's projectiles. Kisame skidded on his feet to a stop near the tree line just as Naruto jumped from the tree cover above the Kirinin, throwing a stream of shuriken and kunai, aiming for Kisame's vitals. Thanks to the sheer size of the Samehada, Kisame employed his great strength to use his sword to swat the tiny projectiles away like flies. Naruto's throwing weapons bounced away like darts hitting an iron wall. Itachi found himself engaged in combat with the Toad Sennin as Jiraiya used several different jutsus meant to ensnare the Uchiha renegade's feet in some pit of mud or tar or break his footing by turning the ground into sand or jumbled rock with earth grating rumbles and cracks. All the while Jiraiya remained blindfolded with his horned headband, using sound alone to guide his attacks while keeping the Uchiha from ensnaring him in any illusions through eye contact. Itachi settled for using his shuriken, kunai and kaiten jutsus. Tiring of swatting away the Jinchuriki's ningu, Kisame decided to take the initiative and ran full speed to his intended target, his Samehada raised for a crushing overhead stroke. Naruto had to jump aside to avoid the weapon before it smashed the spot where he previously occupied, burying nearly a foot into the hard dirt. He rolled the momentum to his feet and sprang backward as Kisame instantly gave chase with Samehada poised for another strike. Naruto shoved his hand into his rear pouch and pulled out 2 kunes. Gripping each in one hand, he threw them in opposite directions, embedding them deeply into the solid bark of the trees to his sides. Predictably, Kisame brought down his Samehada on the airborne genin, but before his weapon even came hitting its intended target, the Kirinin felt a sudden resistance in his swing before his sword stopped still in midair, several feet away from even touching Naruto. After getting a closer inspection, Kisame cursed. His Samehada had hit a length of garrote wire fastened between the 2 kunai Naruto had thrown just seconds earlier, stopping his weapon. Worst, the back curved teeth-like blades of Samahata were hooked onto the wire, entangling it. He couldn't pull his weapon free without proper leverage. Thisum's momentary distraction cost him dearly. The Kirinin had only a second to look back on Naruto before the blonde Jinchuriki pulled out a scroll bound with rope, cutting off the bindings with a knife and unfurling it with a snap, dragging a line of blood across the paper with his thumb. Whether it was instinct or perhaps an ability to sense the power contained inside the scroll, Itachi nonetheless broke off his melee with Jiraiya and went into a fast sprint, shouting, "Kiss him. Get away from the brat, now." Despite Kisum's effort to make a hasty retreat, sensing the danger from Itachi's tone of voice, it was too late for the Kirinin. Bringing the rolled-up scroll between his folded hands that finished their sign weaves, Naruto growled Kai. And the scroll combusted into a ball of black and violet fire, swelling in size before surging like a blazing missile toward Kisum. The Kirinin abandoned his Samahata, desperate to escape the reach of Amaterasu flame, but still his arm became enveloped in the jet-black blaze, turning his robe sleeve and arm completely into ashes. Kisum screamed in pain, ripping off the burning remnants of his sleeve to keep the black fire away from destroying any more of his flesh, revealing the blackened stump of his right arm. Kisum's momentary distraction earned him a vicious punch in his kidney from Tsunade, propelling the Kirinin nearly 10 yards in the direction of the Katsuai Sennin's near back-breaking blow. He righted himself with a grunt of pain and skidded to a halt, mentally calling his Samahata back to his hand after snapping itself free from the garrote wires. Itachi landed beside him a second later, sizing up the group before them. "That was your Amaterasu flame, wasn't it, Itachi?" Kisum muttered to his partner, hissing in pain from the flare of agony burning on the stump of his right arm. "The same flame you used to escape the Toad Sennin's jutsu back at the hotel. Jiraiya-san must have sealed my flame away in that scroll and gave it to Naruto-kun before they attacked us." Itachi's voice carried a note of impressment. Naruto-kun actually made some of his Kage Bunshin's henge into the whole group itself to serve as a distraction while the real bodies kept hidden in the forest. They must have been expecting us. So what now? Our surprise attack is gone and I'm injured badly, both from the Amazon bitch's punch and the brat scroll. My arm's gone now. Hearing no response forthcoming, Kisum glanced down at Itachi, whom was staring in direct eye contact with Naruto. Oddly, the blonde Jinchuriki showed no signs of effect from any of Itachi's ninjutsus the Uchiha Nukenin would otherwise be employing upon making eye contact. Strangest of all, Naruto's expression showed only a grin. Kisum involuntarily shivered from the look in his eye. After several tense moments, seeing that none of the Konohanins were going to attack again yet, Itachi leapt away into the depths of the forest, followed closely by Kisum. By the time the pain in Kisum's ruined stump abated to bearable levels, the Nukenin duo left the Konoha shinobi nearly 3 miles behind. Kisum found it very unnerving that Itachi didn't say a word throughout that time, especially with seeing their target unaffected by the Uchiha's ninjutsus. It was unfathomable that anyone could endure any one of his illusionary technique, minor or powerful. The silence stretched, filling the Kirinin with a growing sense of unease. "Itachi?" Kisum called over the roar of the rushing air. At first glance, it appeared the Uchiha hadn't heard his partner, but when Kisum was going to try again, Itachi spoke. "I couldn't ensnare his mind with any of my jinjutsus." "What?" The revelation nearly made the Kirinin stumble in midair as they vaulted off the ground once more, going airborne over the tree canopy and covering more distance. "When the Kyuubi vessel locked gazes with me, I tried to subdue his mind by using every jinjutsu available without taxing my chakra reserves. However, after none of my conventional techniques worked, I tried using my Magenkyo Sharingan instead but none of them worked on him. It was like he wasn't even in front of me. His mind was either barricaded by a powerful defensier, as I experienced, it was void of everything. Just a cold dark emptiness. So what does that mean for capturing him?" Itachi considered Kisum's question carefully, weighing their options. "We must report this new development to our master. You and I may have just become ill-suited to capturing the Kyuubi vessel. We'll most likely be given a different assignment." Kisum grimaced in private humility. "Great," he muttered, "now we gotta leave what was our job to someone else." The Kirinin glanced down at the stump of his arm and turned bloodthirsty livid. "Whoever captures the brat better bring him back unharmed. I gotta pay him back personally for my arm." With interest. Their entrance into Konoha was at least less dramatic than their encounter with Itachi and Kisum on the road. After another day of travel by leaping jumps and leisurely walks, Jiraiya and party finally made it to their home village, deciding to use a little discretion to meet privately with the village elders and assign Tsunade as the godame of Konohagakure. A few documents and words-spoken pledges later, Tsunade was now the leading authority in the village. Konoha itself was a massive, expansive city, housing between 10 to 15,000 citizens, villagers and shinobi alike. The layout of the village itself was shaped like an unfolded fan, where 4 quadrants or sectors of the city were separated by wide avenues, 3 levels to each quadrant that tapered to the base of the village itself, the Hokage Monument, the cliff face with the giant busts of all the previous village leaders of Konoha's history. Before, during the Shodame's reign, all the buildings were once made entirely of chakra-shapen trees that made the base structure for which the village of today had built upon with steel and mortar, expanding its reach all the way to the vast forest surrounding the village itself. Such was how the village earned its name. Having entered the village gates earlier, Naruto noticed that few if any of the villagers actually recognized him, though many didn't hide their interest on seeing someone so terribly scarred. No one could even guess who he was due to having pulled the cloth of his headband completely over his scalp, covering his bright blonde hair. No one glared, sneered, stared contemptuously at him as Naruto was familiar with. He found it both a relief to not endure the villagers' harsh glares, but also vexing that he had to avoid their hate by his change of appearance. He idly fingered his holstered kunai at his thigh, watching them pass him by. He grinned when he saw passers-by flinch from his radiated killer intent. It served them right. With Shizune already hard at work in the hospital to tend to patients from the attack by Odo and Suna during the Chunin exams, Naruto and Jiraiya followed behind Tsunade as they made their way through the corridors of the Hokage Tower toward her private office. On their way there, they bumped into none other than Nara Shikamaru and what could only be his father. The Nara boy was the same age as Naruto, whom had a lean frame with pitch black hair tied back atop his head, looking like a paintbrush. His eyes were narrow, squinty, and his face was almost always in either a pout or grimace. Never without a comment of how everything that requires effort with a how troublesome remark, his intelligence far exceeded his outward demeanor and appearance, where he could strategize in even the worst conditions, as he demonstrated during his match in the Chunin exam finals. He wore a wire mesh shirt under a green-hemmed gray vest and black ninja trousers. His father, whom Tsunade called him Shikaku, was like an older version of Shikamaru himself, except for the ragged scars on his left temple and cheek, the goatee on his chin, and the green flak vest he wore over his wire mesh shirt. Upon seeing Naruto as well as his new clothing, Shikamaru drew up short, staring wide-eyed and somehow recognizing him. His father had done the same, except his gaze was on Tsunade. Not in the sense of attractive interest, but more along respectful admiration. Of course, for Shikamaru's case, he seemed more surprised by his garish scars he acquired. Although part of his surprise might be from also his ghostly skin tone. "Geez, Naruto," Shikamaru muttered, "what the hell happened to you? Your face is a mess of scars, you're white as a ghost, and you lost an eye. I swear I mistook you for Ibiki-san. And what happened to your jumpsuit? Long story. Better if I tell you when everyone's together so I won't have to repeat it. So, where are you going?" Naruto glanced down the hallway where Shikamaru and his father were headed. "The only room down there is for registration." "Something happened?" Shikamaru grinned, though it seemed a little forced. "Just have to settle some troublesome business with my dad here. Nothing, I hope that won't take very long." After Tsunade waved goodbye to the Naras, the troop went straight for the Konoha hospital. The building was square with a stale white interior of tiled floors and mortar walls, nearly 50 rooms on each of its 4 floor levels. The place smelt of antiseptics, medicine, alcohol, and ammonia. The air they breathed was throat-stripping dry. Nurses, doctors, recently released patients thronged the hallways in some places, empty of activity in others. Most of the patients were shinobi whom had suffered the worst injuries from the sound and sand invasion during the Chunin exams, though many were on their way to recovering. The same couldn't be said for the unfortunate ones that never even made it to the hospital during the initial attack. "Tell me, Jiraiya," Tsunade said after a time of silence, "which patients needed my help again? I told you before we left Tenzaku. It's Kakashi, Uchiha Sasuke, and Guy's pupil Lee." Having heard whom needed her immediate help, Tsunade went straight towards Sasuke's wardroom. Naruto knew without a doubt that Haruno Sakura, the female teammate of Team 7, would be waiting there beside Sasuke's bed when he woke up. For some reason, he felt no pang of jealousy or anger because of it having once vied for Sakura's attention for the better part of a year, after all, which left him perplexed. As far as he remembered during his team matchups, Sakura had always been his source of interest, even when she outright didn't care for him, even thought him annoying when she herself vied for the Uchiha survivor's attention. As much as he knew the feeling of jealousy always filling his gut when around Sasuke, now he didn't care. And again, "I'm not the same person as I was back then anymore, am I?" The truth of that statement stabbed him harder than anticipated, making him wince. He had changed. Not just in the sense of his appearance, battle-scarred as he was now, but also of his change of mind. Naruto didn't doubt that part of that mental alteration was due to Doki's fusion with his psyche, lending him the cold hard intellect of a natural-born killer whose sole ideal was pragmaticism. But maybe that's what becoming a true shinobi was like. Killing your past where you only lived in the present and awaited an uncertain future. The reality of that made Naruto shudder. Seeing no reason to visit his teammates, Naruto wandered around the hallways, glancing into open rooms while Jiraiya went someplace else to kill time. Most likely he was already at the women's hot springs, peeping in on them bathing for his so-called research purposes and inspiration for his perverted reading books. The Icha Paradise novels. The thought annoyed Naruto that the pervert acted so shamelessly. Naruto stopped as he passed by another recovery room when he saw a dark-haired nurse striding out of the room with dirty towels in her arms. Naruto recognized her as Rock Lee's nurse. But this wasn't Lee's ward. So who was she tending to? Curious, Naruto stepped into the room. The curtain was pulled open to allow the light into the room through the window. The glare of the sunlight reflecting off the smooth white tiled floor made him wince. A vase of flowers sat on the patient's bed stand. Several machines were connected to the bed patient with tubes, wires, cables, as well as paper seal wards were plastered all across the bed frame and the bedding. At first glance, Naruto started. What's Sasuke doing in here? Wasn't he in the West Hospital wing? But then his eyes discerned several minute details. While his face resembled very much like Sasuke's, his hair was ragged, dark brown, almost as black as Sasuke's, but too short for the Uchiha's hairstyle. The garish vertical furrow of a scar ran down the right side of his face across his eye, down cheek and past his jawline. For some reason beyond his knowledge, Naruto thought he looked familiar, but couldn't remember from where. A flicker of reflected light shined into his eye from his right, drawing him to face the source. A pile of ragged clothes once white and camouflage-colored, now either faded dull or smudged dirty and tattered, were folded under some kind of metallic device like a giant gauntlet. A closer inspection revealed several holes on one side of the device. A heap of bloody gauzes, most of them ripped and just tattered ribbons, rested beside the pile of clothes. Naruto pieced together the clues in 3 heartbeats. When he did, he finally remembered. He turned and stared at the patient with wide eyes. Careful not to make any noise, Naruto turned back and left Osu Kanuda's recovery room. After Tsunade tended to Naruto's sensei, Kakashi, as well as Sasuke with some chakra rejuvenation techniques to heal their minds after suffering from the after effects of Itachi's Magenkyo Sharingan, Naruto was called into the Hokage's office, where the slug Sannin sat waiting behind her new desk, which was littered with scrolls and stacks of unsigned papers. When Naruto arrived, Shikamaru was already waiting there with his hands in his pockets, obviously bored. Naruto looked around the room with a sweeping glance before standing straight at attention. What is it you need of me, Hokage-sama? Using such respectful endearments when addressing someone was unfamiliar to the blonde genin, but thought it prudent considering he was now serving a new village leader. Respectful formality was not optional, it was mandatory. Tsunade nodded with approval, pleased with Naruto's use of addressment before saying, I'm glad you both found time to answer my summons, since I have something that might be of interest to you both. Just before healing the patients that needed me this afternoon, the council members and I had a meeting discussing about the Chunin exam applicants and finalists. Due to the fact that the Chunin exam had been interrupted, all the senseis of the Chunin exam applicant finalists were called together to give an evaluated report with their honest opinion through their expert observations of all the genins during their combat. What for? Shikamaru asked with a hint of annoyance. Why would the council care how someone fared during the Chunin exam preliminaries and finals, considering it was cancelled before all the applicants could even show their skills to the potential clients? Sound and Sand's surprise attack interrupted the tournament before it could finish. Because the council, as well as myself, deemed it necessary to promote the most qualified of the genins that made it to the Chunin exam finals to the rank of Chunin. The silence was so sudden, Naruto thought he heard a cricket chirp somewhere. Shikamaru looked like he, too, would keel over with surprise. Shikamaru and I are being promoted to Chunin? Naruto asked. Tsunade nodded. After careful and considerate evaluation, since the attack on the village had left quite a few shinobi either dead or unable to continue pursuing such demanding errands, it was in the best interests to select the best qualified among the genins to fill the vacancies in our forces. Why just Naruto and me? Shikamaru asked, weren't there any others that met requirement? You and Naruto here happen to be among the few that actually showed strategy during your matchups, proving that both of you show skill with improvisation and strategizing while on the battlefield. Some among the council and squad jounin, namely Kakashi, tried to encourage having Uchiha Sasuke being promoted, but the only thing he showed during his matchups was just a show of brute force and little strategy, despite the praise of skill he showed in his fights. But Konoha can't afford to have Chunin that just know how to fight, we need shinobi capable to plan and improvise on the field when on missions. Leaders that know how to lead shinobi into battle and weigh the risks. Now as for the others, that remains to be seen, but you two are the only genin of Konoha that will be promoted Chunin rank. The busty blonde woman reached under her desk and tossed Naruto and Shikamaru green Chunin flak vests with scroll pockets on the front. The two newly promoted Chuninins caught the vests easily, but stared at them with dumbfounded expressions. For Shikamaru, this meant he was now required to go out onto the field, risking his life for missions. Naruto, however, was very pleased he had outperformed Sasuke at something so substantial. Being teamed with the Genin of the Year and having him earn more credit than he deserved was a refreshing change and improvement. After slipping on his Chunin vest, Naruto rummaged through the pockets and felt some paper in his left pocket. He pulled it out and found a neat stack of money. He did a rough count of about 100,000 ryo. The amount made his eyes widen, such as with Shikamaru. That's the reward money for Kabuto's head. Jiraiya delivered it just an hour ago and asked me to give it to you since he had to run an errand or something. Despite the light tone of Tsunade's voice, Naruto knew she suspected, as he did himself, that the only errand Jiraiya was likely doing was gathering research. Sometimes he wondered how people could put up with the man's perverted habits. Shikamaru turned to Naruto. Is she talking about the same Kabuto from the exam? When Naruto nodded, Shikamaru's once bored expression became both demanding and eager. Once this business is done, you've got some explaining to do. Fine. But let's wait for teams 10, 8, and Guy before anything else, alright. Shikamaru nodded, though he was visibly impatient to hear what transpired. Are we free to go then, Hokage-sama? You may be dismissed, Nara. Uzumaki and I have something to discuss before he leaves. You may go. Reluctantly, eager to hear Naruto's story, Shikamaru bowed and walked out the office, closing the door behind him. So, what did you need, Hokage-sama? Naruto asked upon Shikamaru's departure. Tsunade didn't say much at first, but she reached again for something from her desk and tossed the blonde Chunin in a dark green pouch case, catching it in one hand and opening it to find several scrolls fitted inside it with some kunais shaped like none Naruto had seen before. He pulled one out and inspected it. The handle of the knife was longer than an average kunai, with the blade three-pointed and shaped like a reverse arrow, center blade longer than the two flanking blades, and a hilt ring at the butt of the knife. Naruto did a quick inventory of one of the scrolls in the pouch, each devoted to instructing methods of sealing and making different forms of ninjutsu. Jiraiya asked me to give these scrolls to you, Tsunade remarked after Naruto put away the roll of parchment. Be careful with them, because those are Jiraiya's personal scrolls which he made himself years ago. The kunais are an additional gift, so use them how you can. But let me make one thing perfectly clear, Uzumaki. Do not, under any circumstances, fool around with the seals and go haphazardly experimenting with them until you've read every one of those scrolls again and again, until you can devote it to memory and not cause a major catastrophe. The knowledge in those scrolls are not to be used for petty amusement, they are dangerous weapons in themselves. Do I make myself clear? Sensing the hostility and dead seriousness in Tsunade's tone, Naruto nodded while carefully fastening the scroll pouch to his belt below his back. I understand completely, Hokage-sama. Satisfied, Tsunade went back to signing the documents littering her desk. Then you're dismissed. To be continued. Unexpected alliance. A giant cavern strewn with stalagmites and stalactites expanded nearly a mile in diameter and nearly 100 meters from floor to ceiling. Darkness pervaded the cave like a living shroud, while the squeaks of bats, flaps of wings, clicks from insects, pads of footfalls, and drips of water plinking from the stalactites dribbled water into still pools dotting the cavern floor, echoed traitorously. The amplification of all the sounds within the cavern were not natural, of course. It was thanks to a wide fieldage in jutsu that amplified every minute sound. If anyone intended to infiltrate the cave, the current occupants would know. Despite the pitch-black darkness where there was no light, two figures traversed through cave with practiced ease, stepping around or hopping above the jagged teeth-like stalagmites on the solid stone floor. Neither depended on needing light to see. The larger of the two could see better in the dark, while the second used his glowing red eyes to pierce the darkness of the cavern. Itachi and Kisame stopped before a clearing free of stalagmites, smooth and flat like the stone itself was molded down like clay. They stood at the epicenter of the giant cave, waiting for someone. Even in darkness, the two Nuknins wore their red clouded black cloaks and bamboo hats, the bells making no sounds due to a minor silent spell. Kisame's vision easily adjusted to the pitch blackness of the cave, allowing him to see in shades of gray. Just like a great white shark, much of his eyes were just a single black iris, allowing him to see even in total darkness. Due to an advantageous mutation, his eyes could even contract into human eyes, which helped when he was fighting in a world of bright lights and colors. Shimmering figures of lighter gray flickered in front of the pair, one instant there, gone the next, only to reappear again, back and forth like faint shadows. Their shapes were reminiscent of what Itachi and Kisame wore, though their height differed between them, as did their hairstyle. Itachi counted 5, meaning 3 were missing of the other 8 Akatsuki members. While 4 formed a circle on the borders of the stone clearing, one of the shimmering, shadowy figures stationed himself in the center of the flat. Itachi and Kisame knelt down to one knee, their heads bowed in subservience. The gray shadows of their accomplices did the same. Doing anything less would invite only their master's wrath. The aura here radiated alone demanded absolute respect. Report. His voice was powerful, carrying the weight of his strength despite how softly he spoke. Pain-sama. I regret to inform you that there has been some complications in capturing the Kyuubi vessel. Itachi hoped his explanation would suffice. Skilled and powerful as he might be, he was no match for the leader of Akatsuki if he chose to make an example of his failure. The eyes of Pain's silhouette narrowed, where a unique eye condition characterized by a number of concentric circles around the pupil, revealed even in the shadow projection. Elaborate, Itachi. After Itachi gave a recount of what happened, Pain turned silent, thinking. Kisame even showed his burned arm. Whole again after using a complex application of a Mizubunshin, the whole shoulder was black as fresh ash, charred and burned. But after which, the Uchiha prodigy revealed something none of the Akatsuki members believed. That the Kyuubi vessel was, for lack of a better term, immune to the effects of his Migenkyo Sharingan, where he was unable to affect his mind with his most powerful genjutsus. Kisame could tell at a glance that many of the present Akatsuki members found it amusing that Itachi's most outstanding power was of no use on a little genin, demon vessel or not. He gripped the handle of his massive sword, Samehada, at his back, looking at each of the Akatsuki members in turn, and felt very inclined to see how far their impudence stretched. Pain silenced their muted chortles with a single glare. They instantly shut up. He turned back to Itachi. If I were to inquire as to how your target came about this immunity, could you give me any facts? Only speculations, Pain-sama, Itachi said quietly, still kneeling. While it was unprecedented that the Kyuubi vessel is unaffected by my Dijutsu, it is not unheard of that anyone has resisted its effects. Pain waited, prompting the Uchiha Nukenin to continue. Among some of the few that actually negated the Migenkyo Sharingan's effects were the Haruno clan of Konoha. Due to their unique split personalities, the twin persona could, by combining their mental strength, negate the Uchiha clan's Dijutsu. Based upon this fact, as the Kyuubi vessel isn't from the Haruno clan, nor I believe possessing their blood, he may have, in the course of the 9 days from our first encounter, altered his mind to be impervious to illusions. It was merely speculation, of course. Itachi had no idea what might have happened to the Jinchuriki that changed him so profoundly, but he and Kisame had investigated the battle-scarred outskirts of Tenzaku after their failed ambush. After finding the incinerated carcass of a giant snake all but solidified Itachi's earlier suspicions that Orochimaru had been in the area and fought against the other two Sannin and the demon vessel. A quick glance up in the face of Pain's shadow projection, Itachi understood that his master already knew what transpired back at Tenzaku, and that Orochimaru has shown himself again. Nearly a decade ago, Orochimaru had joined Akatsuki after leaving Konoha due to having been exposed for his experiments on the victims he captured from his own village. Despite showing great promise as one of Akatsuki's strongest members, he grew too ambitious for his own good, obsessing for the means to attain immortality and learn every ninjutsu in the world. The latter ambition led the Snake Sennin to attack Itachi in order to attain his Sharingan and copy every ninjutsu he desired, but the Uchiha had easily dealt with Orochimaru with his genjutsus and forced the Snake Sennin to run away from the organization, lest he face their wrath for his treasonous attempt on one of their own. It was one thing to cull the weak from their organization through consented combat, but Orochimaru's actions were uncalled for, especially with the great possibility he would betray them after gaining what he desired. He hadn't been seen since. Until now. There was still the issue of how the Kyuubi vessel acquired his newfound mental defenses, but it all summed up to one conclusion: the Kyuubi no Kitsune itself. The vessel and the imprisoned demon spirit were becoming one. Itachi glanced to his left toward two mandible-like jaws projected from his shoulders, enveloping his head in what looked like a Venus flytrap with large curved fangs that trapped Zetsu's head inside his chitinous case. While Itachi had never seen Zetsu's technique, there was no question that the plant-like Akatsuki member was a master of espionage, able to merge with any natural material and move across vast distances almost instantly, putting his eyes in place to observe events and relay them to their master. No doubt he had been watching the entire battle between the three Sannin from afar before giving his report to Pain. Since your first attempt to capture the Kyuubi vessel was unsuccessful, we must alter our plans and collect the other Jinchuriki and Bijuu scattered across the continent. Seeing as how the Kyuubi is the strongest among the Bijuu and his host stronger than anticipated, we will wait until the time is right to capture him again. Pain turned to one of the shadow projections of a man wielding a three-bladed scythe. Send for Kakuzu and go to Kumagakure. Find and monitor the Jinchuriki there, but do not engage it in combat until everyone is present and ready for the ritual. Afterward, return here immediately. Understood, Haiden. The shadow projection of Haiden bowed before his silhouette vanished, having been dismissed. Pain turned back to Itachi and Kisame. Since you failed to capture the Jinchuriki, I have another assignment for you too. Go to the remote villages settled on the borders separating Konoha and Iowa. Coerce them into a frenzy and have start raiding parties. We need a good distraction for Konoha and Iowa until the time comes to implement our final project. Itachi and Kisame nodded in acquiesce, trudging away with a bitter taste in their mouths. To say an Akatsuki member failing any task was nothing short of an insult and a mark of disgrace. Still, that didn't mean neither Newtonins would repay the Kyuubi vessel in full for the trouble he caused them. They'd make sure of it. Should I thank you for healing my injuries and taking me out of my coma? Tsunade barely nodded, not looking at the speaker while washing her hands in hot water. It's not mandatory, but it would fall under good manners and conduct. She paused, wiping her hands dry with a towel. But, as I'm sure you're aware, you will be monitored under close watch. While you may or may not have had anything to do with the Otosuna invasion, I'm not taking any chances regarding whether or not you're still under Orochimaru's servitude. The bed-bound young man spat out the window of his recovery room into the sunlit morning outside. I'll personally see to killing that cold-blooded son of a bitch in his sleep when I can. Tsunade turned around, facing the young man in the hospital bed. Then do you agree to cooperate with us? Osukanuda shrugged. I'm not going to start going on a rampage, but until we reach a bargain, I'm keeping what I know to myself. Tsunade nodded. Given the young shinobi's circumstances, she expected no less. What happened during my absence? Dosu asked. The Godin kept her face perfectly neutral, staring at Dosu's profile. Odo and Suna surprise attacked our village during the fourth match of the Chunin exam tournament. I was just recently instated as Konoha's new Hokage, but from what I've heard from a friend she stressed the word with a grimace. Orochimaru's Otonin summoned some giant snakes and had them attack the village, while Orochimaru himself, disguised as the Kazekage at the time, fought a fierce battle with Sandaime Sarutobi. The stadium was where the attack started. That was about near a month ago. What happened to the Sandaime, then? Dosu asked. Sacrificed his soul to the Shinigami through a sealing ritual to take away Orochimaru's ability to use ninjutsu, sealing away his arms. After which, the snake Sannin made a hasty retreat with his 4 henchmen out of the village, then our shinobi forces drove back the rest of the Suna and Odo shinobi. Dosu was quiet for a while, digesting the information Tsunade provided for him. He gave a brief acknowledgement of respect towards the Sandaime for fighting to the bitter end against that snake bastard, before his thoughts diverted elsewhere. What about Suna no Gaara? Dosu said, cringing from the name spoken. His last memory before all went black was when the Suna genin transformed into a giant monster, then slashing at him with claws larger than pole arms. Tsunade shrugged. As I said, I wasn't here when the attack occurred. From what a friend of mine told me, Uchiha Sasuke pursued Gaara after their match was interrupted with Odo and Suna's invasion attack. 3 genins Uzumaki Naruto, Haruno Sakura and Orochimaru were sent after Sasuke to bring him back to help defend the village. The details were vague, but apparently Sasuke wasn't able to stop Gaara after he transformed into a giant tanuki demon and went into a rampage. Sakura was rendered unconscious early in the fight, while Shikamaru had to stay behind to delay pursuing enemy Otonin. Naruto then had to fight Gaara and managed to beat him after summoning a giant toad for assistance. Had Naruto not defeated Gaara, he would have leveled Konohagakure into ruins. This information is confidential, of course. Dosu shook his head, unable to believe that giant demon monster that so easily nearly killed him was beaten by a clumsy, boisterous genin that was perhaps more hyper than a shrew on a sugar high. Tsunade's voice cut through his silent musings. I've left you some clothes under the window since your other articles were shredded beyond repair. I'm leaving an Anbu outside your room to escort you to Hokage Tower, where I'll have you wait in my office for further instructions. I'll be going now to finish up on helping any other hospital patients. Good day, Dosu Kanuda. Before Tsunade left the room, Dosu called out. What happened to my teammates? You'll find out for yourself when you leave. Then Tsunade turned, opened the door, and left. The sound of the door closing shut was like the judge's hammer finalizing his sentence. Something on your mind, Naruto? The blonde Chunin gave a small start at Tuchi Ichiraku's voice, but shook his head negative. I'm fine. I'm just a little distracted is all. The ramen chef looked worried by Naruto's reply, but shrugged it off as none of his business. Whatever you say. Just don't hesitate to talk to me or AM when you need an open ear. Enjoy your dish. When Tucci walked to the back of his ramen stand, Naruto shoved his ramen bowl aside, unable to find his appetite. The sheer enormity of everything that happened within the span of only 1 month left him conflicted. His head drooped heavily in his hands, breathing out a ragged sigh. Kyuubi took control of my body and would have destroyed Konoha had I not practically given my mind over to Doki. And now I have some dark thing roaming inside of my mind and changing me from within. And worse, I can feel his presence like a poison infecting me. I died twice in one day, once at the hands of Kabuto, again by Orochimaru, and I take Kabuto's life. But I don't feel regret for taking a human life, I only felt satisfaction. Especially after I took both the traitor's eye and the snake bastards. Am I really just as much a bloodthirsty monster as the demon fox inside me? Scarred by Orochimaru's sword, and the Kyuubi gives me an eye his eye and replaces the one I lost to Orochimaru's sword. Pale as gray and disfigured, I look just like a resurrected corpse. Thank you very fucking much Kyuubi, you hairy Sanuva bitch. Naruto blew out a frustrated breath. He felt so damn confused. What was happening to him? Why did he feel so drained? Empty? He didn't know. But maybe he really didn't care, since none of it really even mattered. Hey. Are you alright, Naruto? The blonde Chunin raised his head and turned to the voice. Oh. Hey, Iruka-sensei. Naruto greeted his academy instructor with a less than jovial tone. The scarred-faced Chunin sat beside his former student, concerned. You mean Iruka wore the standard black bodysuit and green flak vest common among Chunin and Jounin, with his black hair tied atop his head like a paintbrush. Average looking to a point, his most distinguishing feature was the horizontal scar across the bridge of his nose and cheeks. He wore his headband across his brow. Iruka looked Naruto over, seeing his new Chunin vest and forced a smile. I see you've made Chunin. That's pretty good. Just 2 more steps away from becoming Hokage. Naruto snorted mirthlessly. All his life he wanted to become Hokage just to be acknowledged by the people of his village. It seemed so long ago that one desire drove him on, motivated him through almost every impossible task he endured. Now it was only a half-remembered childish dream he'd rather forget. Naruto took the direct approach. What do you want, Iruka-sensei? Iruka's expression fell, but answered, I just wanted to say hi. I mean, you've been gone for weeks and I was worried about you. What happened to you anyway? Jiraiya took me along with him to find Tsunade to be the next Hokage. When we found her in Tanzaku town, Orochimaru was already there with his subordinate, Kabuto. The snake Sannin was trying to bargain Tsunade for something so she could heal his arms. When Tsunade refused, she and Orochimaru and Kabuto fought it out on the outskirts of Tanzaku where me, Jiraiya, and Shizune found them fighting. Jiraiya was earlier poisoned by Tsunade, so he wasn't much help. Long story short, I fight Kabuto off Tsunade, Jiraiya fights against Orochimaru, I beat Kabuto, Orochimaru steps in, nearly kills Tsunade with his sword, I take the blow to save her life, snake bastard hacks me to ribbons, I nearly die. While listening avidly, Iruka ordered himself a cup of tea, since it sounded like he was going to be there for a while. Orochimaru and Kabuto moved to retreat, I throw a kunai, kill Kabuto while Orochimaru got away. For that I fell unconscious. That just about sums up of everything that happened to me. I think Orochimaru's sword had some kinda poison coating it that changed my skin color. It was because of that I was left with these scars. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Naruto, Iruka said with sympathy. I can't imagine how much of an impact so many things happened to you in one day. But wasn't Tsunade able to heal your eye? After glancing left and right, Naruto whispered, can you keep a secret for me, Iruka-sensei? Iruka nodded, anxious. Naruto carefully lifted the Konoha hit eye off his left eye, blinking open his eyelid. Iruka stifled a gasp when he saw the glowing red eye of the Kyuubi staring back at him. When Naruto pulled his hit eye over his eye once more, Iruka asked, is that Kyuubi's eye? Not some kind of prank jutsu? Naruto nodded. The eye is tied directly to the seal on my belly. It's completely Kyuubi's and I can't change it to look normal, though I've been trying several jujutsus to at least mask it. Having to walk and watch out for trouble with one eye gets tiring. Iruka nodded, deciding to change the subject. Has Hokage-sama given you any missions yet? No, but I think Abe-chan will give some assignment today. Personally, I hope it soon, I've been back for only 2 days and already I feel like I've stayed too long. Naruto stood up, leaving money for the ramen he never ate. Thanks for the talk Iruka-sensei. It was good seeing you again. As Naruto was making his way down the street, he heard Iruka shout behind him in a cheery voice. Take care of yourself Naruto. Good luck and stay out of trouble. Hey. When have I ever done otherwise? Naruto called back in a much more lighter tone. Iruka's voice faded into the background of the street traffic and the blonde shinobi smiled his first genuine smile since returning to Konoha. It was good seeing his teacher again. Osu's first assumption was that his teammates were either comatose, bedridden due to extensive injuries that would leave them crippled for the rest of their lives, or near death and just inches away from their last breath. What the fuck are you doing with that bottle? And again, from the room on Dosu's right, a Chunin crashed through a door, snapping it off its hinges, before it and the Konohan Inn hit the wall with a crack, leaving behind a shallow depression in the wall. Staring at the fallen, unconscious Chunin for a moment, Dosu turned and peeked around the doorway into the recovery room. Inside, no less than 3 men were struggling to subdue a young teenager with black hair that stood up in straight spikes and a weary frame, dressed in only a white hospital gown as he kicked and punched at his subduers, releasing a stream of curses that could make a salty seasoned sailor blush. Osu stared at Zaku Abumi's hands, remembering that the Aburam boy had used his insects to plug Zaku's hand vents and caused the Odo Nin to blow his arms off when he tried to attack using his Zankyuha during the prelims of the Chunin exam. The medic nins had done an amazing job repairing his damaged limbs. After another few minutes, during which the same Chunin who crashed through the door got up again and aided in subduing Zaku, the riled Odo-nin had been sedated with an injected tranquilizer by one of the female staff nurses. Once they securely tied Zaku into his hospital bed, he was snoring loudly and peacefully. While the four Konoha-nins were recovering from their arduous efforts in restraining Zaku, Dosu glimpsed Kintsuchi, a lithe-figured Kunoichi with long black hair like velvet, dark eyes and modestly attractive face, resting on her hospital bed while reading a book of some kind. Dosu stepped up beside his ex-teammate. "How are you feeling?" Kin shrugged. "Could be worse. The nurses are only partial stuck-up bitches and the food's little better than refuse. Still, I'm not being mistreated. My only complaint is that idiot." She pointed at the prone Zaku with her chin, waking up and causing a near riot. "Damn fool nearly kicked one of the guards into my bed." "So it was with his sudden outburst?" Dosu asked, eyeing his sedated teammate with trepidation. "One of the nurses came in with a urine bottle so Zaku could piss without the mess. He suddenly wakes up with his pants down his ankles and bolts off his bed like a startled cat. Funny as hell to watch except for when it gets out of control." Dosu chuckled at the imagery, turning back to glance at his Anbu escort, waiting for him outside the recovery room. He turned back to Kin. "I've gotta go. I'll be back tomorrow." Kin nodded politely, waving him away to go. "Thanks. See you, Dosu." Once Dosu left the room, Kin stared longingly at the doorway, hoping to get back on her feet and run free again with her teammates. Zaku's snores had quieted down enough to a more bearable level. Kin tossed her book away, uninterested anymore in reading with so much on her mind. Fuck doctor's orders. I need to move my feet. Uchiha Sasuke wasn't what most of the villagers would expect him of, actually showing more emotion than stoicism, but today he felt entirely furious. The reason behind his anger could be summed in one name. Uzumaki Naruto. Despite his drastic change in appearance, Sasuke couldn't bring himself to accept the Naruto of now as the same person he was before his repeated failures in school. Watching his teammate act like a fool was normal. But knowing now, after observing him for nearly a whole year and hearing about him reaching Chunin rank, that Naruto had deceived everyone. He wasn't a real klutz, but a damn good actor just to get some attention. Several factors summed up to Sasuke's recent disdain of the blonde Chunin. For one, Naruto managed to defeat Gaara of the Sand, while being able to summon not only a literal army of cage bunchins, but also conjuring a giant toad to battle against the crazed monster after he transformed, showing a level of power above and beyond anything he'd shown back at the Genin Academy. Back then, he was just the class clown, the dead last. While he, Sasuke Uchiha, the proud survivor of the Uchiha clan and top of his class shinobi, couldn't even so much as effectively wound Gaara as he changed into a monster of sand. What have I been doing all this time? He asked himself for perhaps the 100th time since after his fight with Gaara. While Naruto was constantly growing stronger, he himself felt like he was being left behind. Reason 2 for his anger toward his blonde teammate. Itachi and his partner, Kisame he was called, showed no interest in Sasuke's presence, as though he was no more significant than a fly. After killing their parents before his eyes and bringing near total genocide to his clan, he should have at least acknowledged him after everything he'd suffered. To add insult to injury, Sasuke's every attack was easily diverted and evaded, while Itachi used only a few taijutsu attacks to beat him down into a boneless heap. Pinned and helpless against the hallway wall of the hotel, Sasuke still remembered vividly what Itachi whispered to him. "Pathetic little brother. Still too weak. Not a knight." And then Itachi used his Magenkyo Sharingan and forced Sasuke to watch his clan's genocide over and over again for 24 hours in the span of a second that ripped his mind apart. He hadn't felt the same since, despite what the god aim had done to repair the damage. Too frustrated to even care about either going to his home or having lunch, Sasuke settled for going to the training grounds to let loose some of his pent-up aggressions. Besides, having been confined to a hospital bed left him desiring some real exercise. Picking off the street into an airborne jump, Sasuke sailed through the air and landed in a crouch onto the nearest tiled rooftop, breaking into a dead sprint at full speed. The surface beneath his feet was an unseen blur, as if the earth itself was being pulled backward from under him. The exhilaration from the run itself was the cure that plagued his mood. His expression was a mix of excitement and satisfaction as he neared his destination. So absorbed into his run, Sasuke was never aware of someone down below on the street shadowing him the whole way. When Naruto reached his home, he found the door to his apartment ajar and nearly off its hinges. Stepping inside, his once spacious apartment was a mess. Shattered glass carpeted the floor, as did several stones which destroyed the window. Ripped open trash bags spilled refuse onto the floorboards which attracted a buzzing swarm of flies. Graffiti stained the walls with either obscenely vague pictures and words, with the cupboards and pantries of his kitchen wide open and his dishes shattered. Only 2 rooms were untouched. The bathroom and Naruto's small improvised training room. He might have been surprised and angry, but this was nothing new that he hadn't gotten used to. Naruto spied several kunes and shuriken embedded into the hard plastered walls and wooden support beams. Some knife-happy genin must have joined in wrecking his place, as no Chunin could do this without someone reporting it with so few hands to spare for gourd patrols and mission departures. Better tell Abe-chan tomorrow. The last thing she needs is having some rogue going around trashing houses to kill time. That thought finished, Naruto proceeded to try cleaning up the mess of trash. The blonde would have considered doing this earlier when he first returned to Konoha, but had chosen to rest in a hotel near Hokage's tower in light of an early and sudden summons from Tsunade. Some 30 minutes passed as Naruto was near finished with straightening out his apartment when there came a loud series of knocks at Naruto's door. He kicked aside some trash bags and opened the door. An Anbu wearing a dog mask saluted him before speaking. Hokage-sama has left orders for me to deliver your mission assignment, as well as formal apologies for not giving it in person. She has a lot of paperwork to fill out. Here's your mission scroll. Naruto thanked the Anbu before the missionary teleported away in a puff of smoke. When opening the scroll, Naruto couldn't help but roll his eyes, exasperated. He went back inside and refitted his weapon gear before closing and locking his door. Much good that'll do, he thought, and took off toward Hokage's tower via leaping from rooftops. With his Anbu escort outside the Hokage's only door, Dosu allowed his eyes to wander about, instinctively searching out all the people inside the building with his hypersensitive hearing. It wasn't all that difficult since the walls were not too dense or thick. By the pads of footfalls, the different voices and overall vibrations, Dosu counted exactly 114 people inside the tower. At least his senses were still sharp as ever. His limbs, though strong again after medic Nin's applied healing chakra for blood circulation, were still feeling out of touch. It would take days of decent exercise to get back into his top performance. After a while, against his better judgment, his eyes would straight at Tsunade and observe her. His one eye would trail across her face, searching for any imperfections, finding none, then inevitably staring at her large bust and tempting cleavage. Despite his current disinterest in females in favor of heightening his skills, Dosu couldn't deny that the goddess was an attractive woman. I don't need to look up to know you're staring at me. Tsunade's voice was calm and light and, dare he say, flattered. Dosu blushed slightly at being caught, but didn't speak. His foot was already in his mouth. A knock came at the door, saving Dosu from any further embarrassment. A voice called, Hagek-sama. Uzumaki Naruto is on his way after reading your message. He should be here in a few moments. Thank you. Return to your post, Anbu-san. Tsunade called out, still not looking up from her desk. The Anbu's footsteps faded away as he left the floor. Another few minutes passed when the door opened. Dosu turned and saw a teenage boy and girl, near his age, enter the room with a tall woman in tow. The door closed behind them. The girl was the Hyuga heir, if Dosu wasn't mistaken. Slightly shorter than himself, the girl's skin tone was pale and unblemished. Her pretty face was framed by two bangs of hair so dark, it appeared indigo blue in the light from her skullcap hair. She wore a baggy hooded sweater and dark trousers with weapon holsters and pouches. Her posture was slouched slightly, as though trying to hide herself. He remembered her name being Hinata. The boy, Inyazuka Kiba, Dosu remembered, was the one Uzumaki Naruto fought and defeated in the Chunin exam prelims. Nearly as broad-shouldered as Dosu himself, Kiba wore a baggy sweater with black fleece on the sleeve cuffs and hood rim with dark trousers. His face was lean with a hard jaw, feral eyes like a wolf's, and even had pronounced canine fangs peeking from his lips. A small dog more like a puppy with floppy ears peeked its head out of the boy's collar. The tall woman, the boy and girl's Jounin sensei Dosu assumed, was breathtakingly beautiful. Her long brown hair reached to her lower back, curling about like silky vines across her shoulders. Her eyes were as red as her lips, like scarlet, and her figure was slim, but well proportioned with wide hips, toned legs and arms, and a modest bust. Her outfit, unlike any other Jounin's clothes he'd seen, was merely a short robe wrapped in strips of cloth that stopped just below her hips with one red arm sleeve. At least his observations were more discreet and hadn't drawn the attention of either Tsunade or the woman, Kurenai if he wasn't mistaken. You wish to see us, Hokage-sama? Kurenai asked politely, after she bowed with her students. Tsunade raised herself from her seat and walked around her large wooden desk. I have a mission assignment for your genins, namely both of you, Hinata and Kiba. You'll be going to the west near the Fire Country borders where the daimyo had his spies report of renegades and brigands terrorizing the rural villages. This young man here, Tsunade gestured with her hand to Dosu, standing calmly with his arms folded, will be accompanying you and one other. He isn't here right now, but he should be here shortly. Hinata chose to speak, albeit with a quiet stutter to her voice. Ayano, Tsunade-sama, what about Kurenai-sensei? Isn't she coming with us as our squad leader? Unfortunately Hinata, Kurenai said beside the Hyuga girl, I'm going to have to work solo missions that require more Jounins going out into the field, probably for weeks at a time. That's why Hokage-sama deemed it necessary to have all available genins be ready on standby in the village when we need more hands available if most jounins and chunins were already on leave. This way Konoha can still have guards stationed inside the walls and territory and still have personnel available for mission duty. So who's going to lead this mission? Kiba asked with a slight sneer. Hopefully not some arrogant guy with a stick up his "Hey Kiba-kun." Hinata yelled out, her pale face now 3 shades of red. Well, Kurenai's expression was furious, both for the brash boy's uncouth language and in front of the Hokage no less. Tsunade only smirked. Kiba's attitude reminded her of her first encounter with Naruto in the bar. Tsunade's smirk broadened. Kiba was about to get the surprise of his day. Just wait a few moments. You'll see for yourself. Ah, speak of the devil. Here he is now. Come in. Kiba was confused, as was Hinata, but then the door behind them opened and they turned to see who entered. At first, neither recognized him, though the sight of his grisly scarred face and stone-pale skin made them draw back. His hit eye was pulled down over his left eye much like Hada Kakashi, the copy nin and Team 7's Jounin leader. One trait they noticed was how young he was. No older than themselves. Yet he wore a green flak vest, either a Chunin or a Jounin, but neither Hinata or Kiba had ever seen him before. But then Hinata spied the rust-orange trousers, the bright blonde hair that peeked out from under the cloth cap across his scalp, and unmistakable whiskers she loved so much. Even before she saw his dark blue eye, she knew who he was. Naruto-kun. Naruto nodded, not looking at her and standing at attention beside Dosu, waiting for Tsunade's orders. Kiba's eyes were wide with shock, while Hinata barely suppressed a gasp, holding her small hands over her mouth. What happened to him? Mind telling me why you decided to write in the message scroll you delivered, "Please come to Hokage's tower to receive your assignment," when you could have just told the Anbu who delivered it to relay the message? I mean, for Kami's sake, that was Sannin. Hinata exhaled a small breath, relieved that he still sounded like himself, if a lot more controlled and mellow. Unimportant. I'm assigning you as team leader for this mission. Tsunade pulled out a small red scroll and tossed it to Naruto, who caught it in midair. All the details about the mission in there. You have 3 hours to prepare for departure, so I suggest you gather your supplies for a few weeks out in the open. You're dismissed. What about him? Naruto asked, pointing to Dosu. The said former Odo nin hadn't moved an inch. You'll be taking him with you to aid in your mission. And this is non-negotiable. You're dismissed, Uzumaki. And good luck to your success. Are you sure about this, Hokage-sama? Yuuhi Kurenai asked Tsunade after the younger shinobi left the office. We can't know for certain what Dosu Kanuta will do alone with him. Why are you risking their safety just to see if he's trustworthy? What purpose can Dosu be to us? It's not that I'm testing Dosu's trust, Tsunade said evenly, but I'm actually testing to see how well different teams can perform on missions. Because we have so few hands available, we need to constantly rearrange 4-man teams so our operatives can be flexible. Besides, I've left a message inside the scroll I gave to Naruto to act as Dosu's watchguard and report anything of particular regarding Itagakure or Orochimaru. I did promise Dosu he wouldn't be put under a tribunal as the council demanded. Kurenai was confused. Why would the council? She stopped short and her eyes narrowed dangerously. I see. Put him under a public execution to boost morale among the villagers and remove a potential threat. Tsunade nodded. The council actually tried to refuse allowing Uzumaki the promotion to Chunin, but once they had suggested to promote all qualifying genin candidates, they let it pass in favor of saving their image. Those pompous pricks actually tried to persuade me to promote Uchiha Sasuke, but declined after hearing the full report from you, Kakashi and Asuma on the observations of the genins during the Chunin exam. Kurenai's expression grew troubled. The council won't tolerate Uzumaki-kun being a shinobi of any standing rank. They'll see it as a threat to Konoha's safety about having a demon wandering free. Sooner or later the council will take extreme measures. Are you and Naruto ready for that? Can Konoha afford a dissension so soon after Orochimaru's surprise attack? We don't have a choice. Tsunade stated. Her pretty face was scrunched in a scowl. We have too many enemies from outside our walls as is. Our only allies are Suna in this war, and I don't doubt the other hidden ninja villages will launch an attack on us soon. Our political enemies, and I'll not even begin to state their names, will do anything to see me removed from office and take authority for their own petty reasons. I need Naruto as much as Sarutobi-sensei needed the Yondaime. Kurenai looked at Tsunade, confused. What does Naruto have to do with this? In that split second to speak, Tsunade's shoulders sagged, as if crumpling from within, and she appeared older than her genjutsu deceived. Take a seat, Kurenai. This will take a while to explain. And nothing of this conversation is to leave this office. Am I clear? Crystal. Good. Now, where to begin? Nearly 2 days into their mission, Naruto, Kiba, Hinata and Dosu were trekking through the outskirts of the forest that dominated the span of the Land of Fire. Taking the lead was Hinata, using her Byakugan to scan the area around them for signs of danger. Naruto took second position to give support with his cage bunshin, Kiba in third for surprise attack, and Dosu bringing up the rear. He was best qualified, as his acute hearing would spot trouble coming from behind. "Why didn't Shino come with you guys?" Naruto asked Kiba, whom was walking behind him. Said something about his dad deciding to train him and take him on missions with him. Since the war started, he figured it was as good time as any to get in more training with his family's art. Then Kiba shrugged. Or something like that. He used too many damn complicated words to really know what the hell he was talking about. "I swear he reads a dictionary every night before going to bed since he was 5. Naruto hummed, nodding. Sounded just like Shino. "What about you, Uzumaki? What did you do for the whole month you were gone?" "Our team had only a few missions between then, but we've been just practicing our teamwork." "Anything interesting happen?" "It can wait until I'm ready to tell you." Naruto looked up through the tree canopy to the setting sun. Dusk was nearing. "Let's set camp and build a fire. Kiba, go hunting. Hinata, stand watch. I'll patrol the area. Dosu, you're with me." Hinata and Kiba looked mildly wary about Dosu going off with Naruto without backup, but nodded and slipped their supply packs off their shoulders. Kiba kicked off the dirt and into the darkening forest, using his keen sense of smell to track for prey. Hinata took to building a fire with dry twigs and branches and dropped a lit tinder pick into the small pile of wood. Naruto and Dosu shrugged off their packs and took to the forest. After making a complete circuit around their camp, Naruto motioned Dosu to stop when they landed on the ground. Once grounded, Naruto conjured 8 cage bunshins and ordered them to scout the area, scattering like frenzied grasshoppers. "I know this may seem unnecessary, but I want to make a few things clear before we continue our mission. 1. You do as I say, no questions asked unless you have plans for alternative courses. I'll need everyone's help in these missions, including you. 2. Unless I tell you otherwise, you do not stray from my side. I've been given express orders to watch you, and frankly, I don't feel ready to trust my life or anybody else's to you just yet until I see for myself you're trustworthy. 3. If under any circumstances you endanger me or my friends, I won't hesitate to kill you. I'll not have any friendly blood spilt because of your treachery or carelessness. Am I understood?" Dosu nodded. "Perfectly." Naruto looked back to their camp. His eyes were hard, cold, and sharp. Like the knife in his holster. "We're going off alone to deal with the bandits. I'll leave 2 of my doppelgangers to disguise as you and act as myself. We're doing this alone." "Why do this alone?" Dosu asked. No concern laced his voice, just curiosity. "What do you hope to gain?" But Naruto had already turned away, heading west under the darkening sky with the setting sun at their backs. His strides were focused and purposeful, and Dosu had no doubt what the blonde Chunin had in mind. With a resigned sigh, Dosu followed. Koiban hummed a merry tune as he and his 20-some comrades, all armed to the teeth with stolen weapons, marched to their home base. He was short, skeletal thin, and his robe was so loose, a gust of wind nearly always made him stagger. His face was like a bird's, lean, long-nosed, hollow cheeks, deep-set shadowed eyes and frazzled brown hair. Still, he could hold his own like any man next to him with his spear blade. Koiban inhaled the fresh, clean air of morning, the sun having peaked above the horizon nearly 2 hours ago. It was moments like these that showed the joy of simple things. Freedom. Breathing. Life. "That yer head out of yer ass already, Scarecrow. Don't want to carry ya if you trip over yer own feet," said the giant man next to the rogue, carrying a large spiked club over his thick crippling shoulder. The big man, nicknamed Crusher for his giant club, only wore a small vest and loose trousers and sash belt, as his sheer size permitted nothing else. His face was a mask of scars and black facial hair trimmed in a goatee with bushy eyebrows. Several of the bandits around them laughed, causing the small thin rogue to scowl. It annoyed Koiban to no end that Crusher talked down to him still like some lackey, despite having worked next to the big man with their leader for over 13 years, but kept quiet. Nothing would come of talking back but a busted lip or a broken face. Something from the forest rustled. All the bandits were suddenly on high alert and snapped into defensive positions, forming a rough circle to watch all directions for any incoming attacks. Koiban gripped his spear shaft tightly, his palms growing sweaty. The forest, their surroundings, everywhere, it was deathly quiet. Like the earth was smothered in silence. A tiny dot of shadow flickered on the grassy ground in front of Koiban's feet and he looked up to see what it was. The sunlight blinded him and ruined his chance to see, but then it gleamed with reflected light, stinging his eyes. Then it dropped like a stone, aiming for him. Whatever it was, the object was deadly. He hopped under Crusher's giant upraised spiked club, using it as a shield. Crusher growled something in his throat but fell silent when the sky grew dark. Everyone looked up, and then it was raining death. Dropping from the sky around Koiban were hundreds thousands of kunes that pierced into the grassy soil, slicing through the bodies of his comrades and embedding into their flesh. Safe from the falling knives under Crusher's giant club, Koiban watched in avid horror as his men died around him. A stray knife sliced through the sleeve of his robe, but he didn't notice. Then Crusher fell, bringing his club down with him, and hit the ground like a felled tree and removing Koiben's temporary cover. The rest of the bandits soon followed suit, plopping onto the blood-soaked ground with wet smacks. Countless kunes peppered the soil like deadly mockeries of flowers, gleaming wet with blood and grass-dew. His breaths came in short gasps as his knees buckled and gave out from under him. Koiben stared wide-eyed at the carnage around him, of the bodies of his men turned into pincushions, knives sticking out from their flesh. He felt the bile in the back of his throat rise. He blinked, then shot back in fright. One instant no one was in front of him, the next second there were two shinobi standing there, looking over the grisly scene. One was a dark-haired teenager with an eye patch and a metal gauntlet on his right arm, the other was a young man around the same age with blue eyes, green flak vest and rust-orange trousers. When his eyes flicked around himself, the massive kunes had disappeared, leaving only one atop Crusher's spiked club. He knew now what stood before him. Shinobi. The one with the eye patch turned to his partner with the blonde hair. What was that technique you used on them? I've never seen so many kunes appear and drop from the sky. It's called kunai kage bunshin no jutsu. Just like my primary technique, except I apply several more hand seals to make the chakra stored inside the knife to make it replicate. It's easier if it has a chakra string attached to it. The blue-eyed shinobi stared down at Koiben with a look of utter calm but deadliness. The thin rogue sudden felt like a peasant before a king. Since you're the only one alive, you'll be coming with us. It wasn't a request or a suggestion. It was an order. Koiben hadn't realized he was shaking until he spoke in a stutter. Who or why you? What, how? The one with the gauntlet and eye patch grinned maliciously, raising a finger to his lips in a silence gesture. Shhh. It's a secret. Koiben had heard once long ago as a little boy from his father about men being capable of inspiring greater fear in others than most demons and monsters of ancient folklore and today. And right now, he felt he was in the presence of two such beings. He was terrified. Knowing it was senseless to refuse or resist, Koiben stood on shaky legs and allowed the blue-eyed shinobi to tie him up with thin metal wires, securing his arms to his sides. After he was fully bound, Koiben's captors lead him into the forest, away from the slaughter and scent of blood. He tried to ignore the wet sounds of his footsteps in the grass and prayed he'd live through this nightmare. Another 2 hours passed. Naruto began refitting his gear and weapons, tightening straps and readjusting his leather armor beneath his flak vest. His genjutsu mask faded away and had to apply a double hinge to cover his scars, birthmark whiskers, and his red eye, though it was more difficult to hide his pale skin. He wanted nothing of his true appearance to be noted by any enemies should he fail not to eliminate all the bandits. To defeat an opponent, one must put the fear of defeat into him first. If no one could place him, the fear of being anywhere at any time would act as the perfect catalyst to inspire terror into his enemies. It was, after all, the unknown that inspired greater terror than open confrontation. At least their captive was willing to share as much information as he could give and based on his compliance, knew he was telling them no lies. Dosu managed to confirm it by testing his heart rate without the man, Koiben was his name, from knowing. After getting all the information they needed from the captive, the layout of their stronghold, the number of bandits housed within, and where their captives were located, Naruto and Dosu chose to wait until dusk to attack the stronghold housing the bandit party. After reading through 2 more of his sealing scrolls, Naruto sat with his legs folded in deep meditation. Having to clear his mind, sort through all information stored in his memories, then arrange them into easy access, was the key to mastering any and all techniques he'd learned before and develop later. The task was like building his mind into a series of hallways and corridors, like that of Kyuubi's seal with rooms and doors leading to a different memory. He was reliving the fight against Kabuto. Every detail was still fresh to his mind, but everything during the fight was a blur of motion. Like slowing down the picture frames of a movie in his mind, Naruto had to anchor his will onto Kabuto's form, concentrating. Everything then came into sharper focus. He could remember the musk of his sweat-stained clothes, the burn of his limbs from fatigue, the movements of his attacks clashing against Kabuto's maneuvers. Slow it down. Slower, slower. Find when he attacked. Remember it. Concentrate. The pain of the memory was all he needed. Naruto could still recollect the feel of his ligaments tearing when Kabuto snapped his right leg at the knee, the crunching sound of his kneecap snapping. His leg twinged from the memory. The crunch of dry leaves alerted Naruto of someone behind him, pulling him out of his reverie. He turned, finding Dosu standing ready. With 2 of Naruto's kage bunshin standing guard over Koiben, neither shinobi feared he would escape. I know this might be a bad time, Dosu asked, but won't Kiba and Hinata-san follow our tracks and eventually catch up to us? I see no point why we don't use their assistance still. Naruto pushed himself back on his feet. If Kiba and Hinata are going to follow us, Kiba will have to track us by scent. That's the true reason I deployed 8 kage bunshins to scatter in different directions to lead them away from our present spot. Osu wasn't convinced, and his expression showed. What's the real reason to left your friends behind? That is my business and mine alone. Do as you're told and get your gear situated. We attack tonight under cover of darkness. Naruto then turned his back at Osu, pulled out two odd-shaped kunes and embedded one into a tree to his right and throwing the other one to his left, also embedding it into the solid bark. Osu came closer to inspect the strange kunes, noting the seal formulas scribbled onto the cylindrical handle. What were they for? What are these for? Dosu asked, pointing at the kunes. When Dosu looked back, Naruto was already gone. And Dosu knew where to find him. With another irritated sigh, the former Otanin jumped into motion, following the blonde to their destination. Koiben walked with a slight limp in his step under the dim light of the waning moon, knowing what he was supposed to do. His captors had made it very clear. All he had to do was walk in, tell his comrades his hunting party had been ambushed while he managed to escape, then wait until the ensuing slaughter began. The thin rogue could still remember the blue-eyed shinobi's exact words before releasing his bonds. You're going to help us whether you like it or not. Tell your people your party fell to ambushers while you barely managed to escape to tell the tale. Even mention us as a side note and I'll personally see to killing you in my most torturous fashion. Think of your cooperation as your means of keeping your life. Either my partner here or I could just disguise ourselves as you and another of your party members while we leave you for vultures, or you could play along and live to see tomorrow's sunrise. Decide now while there's still time left to consider the alternatives. Needless to say, Koiben chose to go along with their plan. Between his partners and his life, he'd choose to save himself if possible. It was unlikely the rest of the bandits at their fort would survive the coming slaughter regardless of his death. The blonde Chunin and the gauntlet user then proceeded to beat him with bare fists to give more credibility to his story, leaving him with blue and purple bruises. He couldn't well return alive from an ambush without a few injuries. Finding a dirt-worn path, Koiben knew he was on the right trail leading to the bandit fort. Another 5 minutes and he stepped out of the forest and into a grass clearing with short tree stumps pocketing the area. In the center of the clearing stood the giant edifice of wood, composed entirely of cut-down trees striped down to their yellowish cores. The walls alone were 20 feet high, inner watchtowers almost twice that height. Torches and lanterns were lit, casting garish light around the structure's outer perimeter. If anyone was going to try to infiltrate their encampment, they'd be spotted and dealt with accordingly. Except no one inside those thick wooden walls ever encountered a shinobi all too willing to spill blood and seek it out. They'd all be dead before the sunrise. When he was spotted by the watchtower men, they hollered down to the gatekeepers, ordering them to lower the gate. A giant section of the wall itself lifted upward in a 90-degree angle, nearly a full 500 stones heavy. The winch chains creaked in protest to the mechanical motion, on the verge of snapping into tiny pieces, yet held strong still. Not wasting any time, Koiben shuffled as quickly as his limping form would permit. The heavy wooden gate slammed shut behind him with a thunderous boom. His compatriots swarmed around him, some elated to see him, others scowling from impatience. Nearly 100 bandits comprised the fort's offensive force, another 50 or so only captives and hired whores and hookers. They began demanding to know what happened to rest of the hunting party, emphasizing their demands by raising their makeshift weapons. Koiben did as his captors had told him, telling the story about his group's ambush and how he managed to escape and warn his men. Koiben could see most accepted his story, but several looked skeptical at him. One of the bandits, a man the size of a bear and just as muscular, stepped forward with spiked hammer over his shoulder. He wore dark pants and a V-neck shirt. Something doesn't add up. What did these ambushers look like? Koiben blurted it out without thinking. Samurai. Or Ronins. Some villagers with plows and spades and clubs, and when they saw us, they hit us with arrows first, then came in close. I'm only alive now because Crusher pinned me under his body. He was killed by arrows. After it was over, they took all the weapons and found me alive. They tried to beat me for information, but I stayed tight-lipped. I only managed to escape just an hour ago. They might have followed my trail. Satisfied by his fabricated story, Koiben was left alone in his bunking quarters while the rest of the bandits readied for a possible night attack. They gave him some basic medical supplies to treat his cuts and bruises, which the thin rogue used happily. While slipping off the top half of his robe to wrap gauzes around his shoulder, a small vial with clear liquid inside it dropped out of his inner pocket, clattering to the floor. Koiben's stomach dropped when he saw it. Another of his captors' orders were to pour the vial liquid into the bandits' drinking water. The thought of taking part in actually killing his comrades left him sick to his stomach, but he knew what would happen otherwise. With shaking hands, Koiben picked up the vial and left his quarters, his injuries forgotten. Their infiltration went a little too smoothly for Naruto's liking. Once the waning moon became obscured behind the dark passing clouds, Naruto and Dosu, all but dead, sprinted out of the forest surrounding the bandit fort, hugging the shadows of the flickering torchlight. Only 5 guards were patrolling outside the defensive walls, all of which were droopy-eyed and tired at the late hour. Using his gauntlet to silence the sound around them, Dosu snapped the necks of his victims, while Naruto took to slitting the other guards' throats. Leaving behind the 5 bodies behind, the 2 shinobi used chakra to anchor to their hands and feet to scale the outer wall's vertical surface. They peered over the wall's edge, taking in the scene. Naruto cursed under his breath. There were too many bright lit torches to provide shadows for cover and too many bandits to fight off at once. Even with his cage buncheons, he doubted he and Dosu could deal with all of them without either suffering serious injury or death. An explosion suddenly erupted around the rear barracks in the back of the fort's walls, sending up wood shrapnel and clouds of smoke and dust. The noise was so loud, Naruto thought his ears had split from the inside. His instincts pulled at him, telling the blonde Chunin he had company. He turned to his right, expecting an enemy, but finding the Hyuga heiress instead, her Byakugan active and the veins around her eyes swelling. "What are you doing here?" Naruto demanded, narrowing his eyes. When Hinata turned to face him, she suddenly gasped. At first Naruto was confused, but cursed only a second later, after remembering the Byakugan could see through illusions. She must have seen his red eye through the illusion mask he put over it. Except he didn't have time to explain. "Did Kiba follow us? Is he down there right now?" Naruto's voice managed to shake Hinata out of her shock, though she looked away, ashamed. "Why yes. He's down there now giving you a distraction. We managed to follow you after your cage buncheons timed out. We better hurry before the bandits realize what's going on." Naruto and Dosu nodded, hopping over the edge of the wall and into the chaos. To be continued. What if Naruto Uzumaki Seal Master Chunin exams? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.